Good morning and welcome to Los Angeles City Council. Today is Tuesday, February 28th, 2006. I want to welcome members of the public and our viewers on Channel 35. We are being broadcast on Channel 35, which is our city's television station, LA City View, your channel. We are also being webcast through our city's internet homepage at www.lacity.org. We invite folks to visit that website for a wealth of information about their elected officials and about the workings of the Los Angeles City government. We are also broadcast through telephone via council phone, which is a number you can call to listen to the city council meetings, which are on Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Fridays at 10 a.m. We are rebroadcast in the evening as well, and you can listen to the committee meetings through council phone too. I want to thank council members Cardenas, Gruhl, Huizar, Smith, Weiss, and Zine for being here. We are awaiting 3 more members and would like, Mr. Labange is excused today, so we'd like to ask Ms. Hahn, Mr. Padilla, Mr. Parks, Ms. Perry, Mr. Reyes, Mr. Rosendahl, and Mr. Wesson to please come down as quickly as possible, and we will begin this meeting of the Los Angeles City Council as soon as we have a quorum. Thank you. Mr. Rosendahl and Mr. Wesson. We are now 1 member short. Ms. Hahn, Mr. Padilla, Ms. Perry is here. We have a quorum. Madam Clerk, please call the roll. Hold on 1 second. I think your volume switch is not on. Ms. Clerk? Try it again. Okay, I'll call the roll. Cardenas, Gruhl, Hahn, Huizar, Padilla, Parks, Perry, Reyes, Rosendahl, Smith, Weiss, Wesson, Zine, Labange, Garcetti. We have 10 members present and a quorum. First order of business.
Approval of the minutes.
All right. Mr. Zine moves, Mr. Rosendahl seconds. If there is no objection, that will be unanimous vote. So ordered.
Commendatory resolutions for approval.
Those commendatory resolutions are moved by Mr. Parks and seconded by Mr. Cardenas. If there's no objection, those will be unanimously approved. And now it's time for our salute to the flag. If I can please ask everybody in council chambers to please rise for our traditional salute to the flag. And Ms. Perry, would you be kind enough to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
Okay. Place your right hand over your heart and begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much, Ms. Perry. Next order of business.
Mr. President, this is the time for comments from the public on items not on council's agenda.
Okay. we'll take public comment at this time on items that are within our jurisdiction but are not on our agenda. Members of the public can come here and speak for 2 minutes on any such matters. And Mary Cummins from Animal Advocates is our first speaker for 2 minutes. Welcome.
Hello. I'm Mary Cummins, and I'm a volunteer with LA Animal Services. I'm also president of Animal Advocates. I've worked positively with the city for many years. I've even received an award from the last general manager of Animal Services. On February 15th, Councilwoman Janice Hahn stood up in City Council and out of nowhere publicly called me a terrorist. She said a constituent of hers gave her a package which said I was a member of the terrorist organization ALF. Without even reading the so-called proof, without doing any research, she slandered me in a public broadcast. Now, the person who wrote this letter, in the same letter, falsely attacks the mayor, the commissioners, the general manager. Why would someone blindly believe what a ranting constituent had to say? If Hahn had read the proof in the package, she would have seen that terrorist organization ALF took a comment of mine, put it in their website without my permission. More importantly, my comment was actually against ADL and against ALF. She didn't bother to read the proof. If she'd done any research, she would have seen that ADL and ALF call me a baby killer because I volunteer in the city's kill shelter. One of them said I should be killed just because I eat chicken. They constantly attack me and my group. How does that sound like I'm a part of their terrorist organization? I'd like to quickly take the opportunity to thank Councilman Zine and Ed Boakes, the General Manager of Animal Services, for publicly telling Hahn that I'm not a terrorist. They know me, and they know I'm completely against terrorism. I ordered the video of the meeting, and I had it transcribed. I also did an Information Act request to get a copy of the package and letter. I came here today to ask Councilwoman Janice Hahn to give me a public apology and to retract her statement calling me a terrorist. I told her I would be here today for public comment. Maybe I can talk to her later about this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Cummins. Anybody else wish? Oh, here's one more. I'm sorry. Vincent Antonino, Eagle Rock Neighborhood Council. Welcome.
Good morning, council members. I would just like to, my name is Vince Antonino. I live in the city of, the neighborhood of Eagle Rock, and I'm also on the board of directors for the Eagle Rock Neighborhood Council. And I'd like to read a statement in opposition to the proposed Oak Tree Amendment that is on your agenda. Pursuing public goals such as protecting environmental integrity, natural resources, historical sites, etc., requires a fair and balanced approach for all stakeholder interest, whether public or private. The proposed changes to the ordinance, in my opinion, will only benefit environmental interest while negatively impacting private property interest. Ultimately, all costs associated with this proposal will trickle down to individual property owners. For large housing developments, mitigation costs associated with tree protection will be passed to new home buyers through increased prices. For individual homeowners, the potential for economic hardship is even more burdensome and unnecessary. The ordinance is not clear on what
Excuse me, sir.
costs...
I'm sorry to interrupt you. This is agendized actually on our agenda as item 37, so it's out of order to talk about it in public comment. But if I can invite you back, since we haven't had a public hearing, we will be having a public hearing today, so perhaps it would be more germane at that point, if you don't mind. And I know that's a little bit longer, but we appreciate your understanding.
Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else wishing to be heard in public comment? Ms. Gruhl, did Mr. Wesson want to make that introduction now? Or Mr. Wesson, did you want to, while we're on public comment, make the introduction, and maybe we'll hear from a special guest we have today?
Thank you, Mr. President and members. I'm honored to rise today to present to you a young lady by the name of Elaine Steele, who is the co-founder of the Rosa Parks Institute and has been a champion in our community for many years. And when we had a ceremony dedicating the part of the 10 freeway, or renaming it, she was here and participated in that. Please allow me to present to you Ms. Steele.
Thank you. Good morning to the honorable City Council people. It is indeed my pleasure to be here this morning to thank you for the wonderful outpouring of love that you gave to Mrs. Parks during her homegoing services throughout the country, and especially here in Los Angeles. I especially want to thank Herb Wesson for his support throughout the years in the naming of the freeway, and Jan Perry and her love and support of many of the programs that we have participated in here. And now Councilman Bernard Parks, who was then Chief Bernard Parks, that Mrs. Parks met on several occasions, and we had wonderful stories that maybe we can share at another time about their relationship. But these wonderful people that stand with me are indeed our supporters of the Rosa and Raymond Parks Institute here in Los Angeles, and in fact made the pilgrimage for the homegoing services with Mrs. Parks throughout the country. Of course, you know the national coordinator, who is Willis Edwards, but indeed Mrs. Parks' personal assistant and angel, who has worked with me for 6 years, Miss Lois Harris, that we could not indeed do anything without Lois. Of course, Tony Nicholas, who is head of the Bradley Center here in Los Angeles, and it was at his parents' home that Mrs. Parks and I wintered for years, and his lovely wife, Anita, and of course, Terry Harris, who has joined us very recently. I thank you.
And Naomi.
Oh, and Miss Naomi, I'm sorry, Miss Naomi, I didn't mean to leave you out, and Miss Naomi. And again, I just want to thank you. We have commemorative books and programs of the 3 funeral services for you. Mr. Edwards has that, and I ask for your continuous support because we're looking forward to partnering with Los Angeles on a continuous basis. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and it's a great honor to have you here. Thank you very much. That closes our public comment for today. Madam Clerk, can we please run through the agenda?
First item, Mr. President, is an item notice for public hearing. Item number 1, the applicant consents to a continuance to March 7th.
Okay, if there's no objection, let's open the roll. Oh, sorry, that's will be continued to the 7th. Excuse me. Next item.
Next items are items for which public hearings have been held, items 2 through 22. Items 2 and 3 are confirmations of commissioners. Do you wish to hold those on the desk?
Yes, let's hold both of those on the desk, please.
And that would leave before council 4 through 22.
Okay. Members, any specials 4 through 22? Mr. Weiss?
I need to
Okay.
find this number.
18?
18, please.
Mr. Weiss calls special. Other specials, colleagues? Hearing none, please prepare the roll on the balance and tabulate the vote.
14 ayes.
Okay, those are approved. Next items, please.
Next items are items for which public hearings have not been held, items 23 through 34. 10 votes are required for consideration.
Okay, 23 through 34, colleagues, any specials? Specials 23 through 34. Okay, seeing none, please prepare the roll. And, let us open and close the public hearings on those, first of all. And now open the roll, close the roll, and tabulate the vote.
14 ayes.
Those are approved. Next items.
Next items on the supplemental agenda are items for which public hearings have been held, items 35 and 36.
Okay, let's call both of those special. And Mr. Reyes?
37 is special.
Okay, we're almost there, yeah. Let's go to the next item then, which is 37, correct?
37 and 38, and there is a card on 37.
Right, let's call that special. Will we consider that? Okay, so let's do 37. Anybody wishing to call 38 special? Seeing none, please open the roll on 38, close the roll, and tabulate the vote.
14 ayes.
That is approved. Next items?
Mr. President, that would take council back to the commissioners, items 2 and 3, and they're both commissioners of the Commission on Children, Youth, and Their Families.
Let's, before we do that, let's reconsider item 19. Is that correct, Mr. Wesson? 19, okay. We open the roll on reconsideration, close the roll, and tabulate the vote.
14 ayes.
Okay, and let's hold that on the desk as well. Okay, commissioners, I'd like to invite our commissioners forward. Do we have them here in chambers? There we go. And I know Mr. Labange, please come to the table here. and have a seat. I know Mr. Labange is excused today, and normally he would be here to speak as the chair, but I'd like to recognize Ms. Gruhl to speak first.
Thank you, Mr. Garcetti, Mr. President. Welcome. Thank you. Thank you. I just want to, one, say thank you for your willingness to serve on children, youth, and families. It's a great commission, one that we expect a lot of. We somewhat, the old saying, or I guess it's overused, but our children are our most precious natural resource, and it's very important, and the commission is going in a direction of making sure that we focus on that issue. And so I'd like to just briefly, I told Don I wouldn't ask too tough questions, but just quick, what is your kind of vision you'd like to see in working on the commission, and like to see it done? And just ask both of you, Sandra and Donna.
Thank you, Wendy.
Hold my time.
I'm a mom of a teenage daughter, and I know how hard it is to get kids through school, through high school, so I just would like to make whatever contribution I can to see to it that the resources of the city are able to reach the children. As a television producer, one of the projects I've been working on is a documentary on obesity, childhood obesity. So my particular issue is to see that nutritional information, physical activity, those kinds of things are put back into the schools so that kids have an awareness of how their health and what they eat, how active they are, ties into their long-range life goals.
Thank you. I think that I would really like to contribute a perspective that combines my experience with community as well as my experience in philanthropy and understanding how difficult it is to provide services to families, and really trying to help shape the future for the city of Los Angeles. I really think that I can contribute and be of service, and I look at this as my contribution to the city of Los Angeles.
Great. Well, you have, before the commission, we've been working very closely with them on a child care policy for the city, and I helped draft it in 1987, and when I was elected, we realized it had never been updated to today. And so that is something we really feel is important on how we look at whether it be child care centers or charter schools or anything that has to do with education, that we look at how the city can be helpful in the process. We may not be responsible ultimately for, funding the entire project or anything like that, but we can play a role, and we'd like to see children, youth, and families provide that kind of leadership.
Absolutely.
I say to many of the commissioners who come before us, this shouldn't be the first and last time we see you, that it's very important for you to make sure that you call us up when there's a problem or there's an issue that we can help. We can use the bully pulpit. We can push some of our departments to do that. So I would encourage you. I know my colleagues feel the same way.
Thank you.
And just a few, because Dawn and I had a chance to meet on the holiday. And colleagues, when you meet someone sometimes and you immediately click, and I think we could have spent hours sitting there talking about children, youth, and families and what we want to see in the city. Dawn is a resident of my district, so I hope we get to have the same chance to sit down as well. But just want to wholeheartedly support their appointments today and look forward to working with them on the commission. And again, thank you for your commitment of time to serve on the commission.
Thank you, Wendy.
Thank you, Ms. Gruhl. Mr. Reyes, to be followed by Mr. Huizar.
Thank you, Council President. Welcome to City Hall. We've been working for the past few years on the issue of gang intervention, how we work with youth. As chaired by Councilmember Cardenas, we've been looking at ways in which we can assess how the city is working in all its respective departments, dealing with gang intervention, youth development. Can you give me a perspective of how you might see your role as a commissioner in this particular committee in working with us in that effort in creating options and relief and giving youth a sense of hope for their future? Some thoughts from your point of view?
Well, I think sometimes when children...
You could pull the microphone closer to you.
Yeah. I think when their resources are cut off in one area, they end up going off into another area. I think it's unfortunate that a lot of public schools no longer have arts programs where kids can take theater and music and those kinds of things to channel their energies into. So I could offer myself and my skills as a filmmaker to someone who could go into the schools and try to present programs to kids to get them involved in something else rather than just hanging out on the streets. I have a 17-year-old daughter, and she's completely immersed in the dance program at her school. And she doesn't get home sometimes till 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock in the evening. She wouldn't be able to join a gang because she's got to be at dance class till 7 o'clock at night. So I think a lot of times it's about children having options and other choices. When they don't have anything else to do, they end up going out into the streets to do what's always out there for them.
I guess a more specific question would be the departments you work with as a commissioner. One of the goals we have is to have each department head be accountable and the ability to create programs and actually create jobs for youth. Is that a step that you would support?
Oh, absolutely.
Absolutely. Thank you, Councilman Reyes. I think that what would be really important is for this city to really look at all of their departments and make sure that those departments that are working with young people are looking at the spectrum of prevention. So really looking at, primary prevention and really trying to focus on young, people between the ages of middle school, and then also focusing on those young people that are struggling and are at risk, and really trying to find ways to create jobs and link them up with jobs that could lead to careers eventually as well. I would be in great support of that.
Right. To the degree that you could, as future commissioners, help us define that function, that particular job description of youth development, youth jobs in your respective departments that you work with, that's an advocacy role you can play as commissioners.
Okay.
This is information that would allow us as a council, together with the mayor, assess how effective the departments are in the city and actually embracing our youth and giving them that accessibility to jobs. And if there are specific language that you can suggest and recommend, please, I'd love to hear from you and from my office. As a member of this committee, we want to be proactive in pushing that envelope and changing the culture of this city and how we look at our youth and actually reinvest in them by recycling jobs through contracts that we're always doling out. We're doling out in the billions.
Yeah.
And why can't we get a percentage of each of those contracts to our youth as an opportunity for jobs? And that's what I'm trying to emphasize. So
Absolutely.
thank you so much for your hard work.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Weezer is our next speaker.
Thank you, Mr. President, and I want to welcome you and to the commission. I want to thank you as well for your willingness to serve. And I think of this commission as one of the most important commissions that the city has, although it's not always viewed that way, because we deal with a wide variety of issues in working with our children, trying to find ways on how to better work with the school district. And I think both of your backgrounds are really going to add to this commission. Donna, with your background as a filmmaker and that unique perspective you will have on the various documentary films you worked on, I know you've researched the issues of children and families quite a bit, and that's going to bring a unique perspective to this commission. And I know, Sandra, with your work on AIDS and health, and particularly how do we get more kids enrolled in free or reduced health care, and your work on violence prevention, your backgrounds, both your backgrounds are really going to add to this. I do ask, and I think Ms. Grew, Councilmember Grew alluded to this, is that please feel free to approach the council members or whatever committees you're working with to the council on being bold on how do we continue to heighten the importance of the issues you're working on. I came from the Board of Education. I was there for about 4.5 years, and I found that the commission often tackled or worked on several issues with the school district, whether it's safety or other things, but there was so much other potential there. So please feel free, and please do come to us with your ideas and how to promote and support our children in this city. And I wanted to hear a little bit about your documentary on obesity. You mind sharing that with us a little bit?
Well, actually, at this point, I'm still in the fundraising stage, which is the first thing you have to do when you're making a film is get the money.
Okay.
But I know that it seems as though like 2 out of every 5 children now under the age of 11 are qualified as obese. And I think it's become a more and more prevalent problem in the United States with children eating, instead of a piece of fruit at a snack, they'll eat a bag of Cheetos or a big 16-ounce cup of soda. And I just think it's a question of not only informing the parents, but also getting the schools and the administrators and everybody who's involved in children's welfare on board as far as helping children make better choices at a very young age, because all of those eating habits that we have are formed when we're really, really young. Childhood diabetes is now like rampant, and it's mostly because children are taking in so much sugar from a very, very early age. So those are the kind of issues in the documentary I want to deal with. I was actually motivated by a terrible story I heard about a little girl in New Mexico who at the age of 4 was over 100 pounds and was actually taken away from her family by social services because they decided that was child abuse. And it is. And I think that the consciousness of the parents and the adults that are responsible for these children is where we have to start, to give people the information that if your child asks for something, you can give them a banana or an orange or an apple. You don't have to cave and give them a popsicle or a bowl of Haagen-Dazs. And I just think that kids, when they are given healthy alternatives, begin to choose those healthy alternatives for themselves if they're encouraged to do so. I think vending machines with soda and junk food should be taken out of the schools, and those are the kinds of issues that I want to explore in the film.
Thank you, and I think that's a very important issue that the city could play a larger role in childhood obesity and the detriment it provides not only to the health of those children, but the society costs later. We have to pay for the costs of the damage that our eating habits at a young age tell us. I know at the school district we banned sodas in our high schools because of the sugar and what that leads to, and now the school district's looking at its whole food menu on how to argue and work with the USDA on what is being recommended for our children to eat, and it's a very important issue. I just would hope you pick that up. I'm willing, and I'm sure this council is willing to work with you to make that more of an issue and how the city could continue to help work with that. And Ms. Martinez, as a 14th Council resident, welcome, and I'm here to serve and work with you, not only the commission, but as a resident of the 14th Council District. I look forward to working with you overall. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot. Thank you.
Mr. Rosendahl.
Good morning, ladies.
Good morning.
First, a general question to both of you. Why do you want to be on this commission?
I've never actually been involved in local politics before, even though I've been a resident of Los Angeles for about 25 years. So for me, this is a chance to do something, now that my daughter's almost out of high school and I'm almost free from the day-to-day responsibility of taking care of her. I'd like to give something back to the city.
Beautiful.
I think I'm really excited about the opportunity, and I'm really thankful that I've been asked and really willing to contribute. And I view it as an opportunity to bring all of my experience and my knowledge and my life experience to the job and really contribute something new, I think, to the commission.
Tell me a little bit about your background.
Oh, okay. My background, I was born and raised here in the general Los Angeles area, and I've lived here. I live, like I said, in the 14th Council District. I work at the California Wellness Foundation, so I work in philanthropy now, but my experience has involved community organizing and community work for many years, and I really feel that part of my experience and my, combined with my education really kind of will help shape the work of the commission.
Excellent, excellent. And when you spoke about your daughter reaching an age where you have time now to give back, I think the key really for our children is parental involvement and keeping parents close to their children, which obviously you have done. What advice do you give to parents out there now on how they should be more engaged with their children, how critical that is for their future?
Well, one thing that I've spoken on before, because I have produced programming for children, some animated fairy tales that were on HBO some years ago. And I was asked to speak about children's television, and people want to attack television producers for the material sometimes that's on TV.
Yeah.
But my response is that there really is no such thing as children's television. It's the television that children watch, which could be anything. And if you really are concerned about that, don't put a TV in your child's bedroom. Have a TV in the living room where everybody can watch it at the same time, or at least you're aware of what that child is watching.
Yep.
And I think people want to make the television the babysitter, and then they get mad at what the kids are learning on television. I just think that that's a misplaced emphasis, and parents need to be a lot more hands-on in terms of interacting with their kids about what influences their kids are taking in. I just want you to know I was asked before this commission to be on the Zoo Commission.
Oh.
And I really didn't feel like I had the same passion for the Zoo Commission that I feel like I will have for children and families, so I was very honored to be asked again to come and serve on this particular commission.
Well, we're honored to have both of you, and when my colleague Ed Reyes talked about the ad hoc committee on gangs, I'm on that committee, and we just approved a contract to Connie Rice and a whole group of community people who are going to do an initial analysis. Do you have any sensing of why 1 out of 3 or 1 out of 4 young African-American men go through the criminal justice system, and the gang issue becomes a drug-related issue? Is there any way in which you feel we can move on that? I know we talk about jobs, we talk about education, and I'm just curious as to the challenge for both of you as to how we deal with the gang issue.
Well, I think it's a very complex issue and multifaceted, and I think what's been learned through my work at the California Wellness Foundation is that comprehensive community-based services that really work intensively with young people, and where young people who have been through that experience and gotten out of the experience are working with other young people, are the most effective programs. And I think that that's a start. I think you've got to be committed to it for the long haul. It's not going to be a 5-year commitment. It's not going to be a 10-year commitment. It's a lifetime commitment to really figure out how to best serve those young people.
Amen. And your thoughts on that?
Well, I also agree with Sandra. I think that a long-term commitment is really essential. And I think a lot of what ends up happening to children has to do with options and choices. And a lot of these young men you're speaking of really have very few options from an early age. They don't see any other choices than the choice to get out on the street and sell drugs. So to the extent that the city can provide an infrastructure where they have really legitimate, viable resources to take them in another direction, I think is where we should be going.
Amen. And I look forward to the two of you challenging us to put those resources in place, because it is critical. I mean, the future are our young people, and I want to congratulate the both of you for stepping forward into this leadership position.
Thank you, Councilman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rosendahl, and thank you to both of you for putting yourselves forward. Ms. Brown-Guillaume, heard great things about you through Ms. Gruhl, and Ms. Martinez, of course. Your resume reads very similar to many of my interests, and I know, having served on the plan board when you were the director of that, very well qualified. So I congratulate you both, and with that, let's open the roll and close the roll and tabulate the vote.
14 ayes.
Welcome aboard, commissioners. Congratulations. Please give them a round of applause. Thank you. Let's send those forthwith to the mayor. Next items, please.
Next item, Mr. President, is item number 18, and that was called special by Councilmember Weiss.
Okay. Councilmember Weiss, we have item number 18 before us. Why don't we hold that for, okay. Mr. Weiss.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, I just want to let you know that what we're going to be passing here in a moment on item 18 is something I call my Neighborhood Protection Plan. And I'm very proud that we're doing this today. When I ran for re-election last year, this was the central thing that I talked about, because I'm sure you all get as many complaints as I do from people who are concerned about development projects in their residential neighborhoods. What I want to do was come up with a set of common sense measures we could implement that would assist neighborhoods, give them some basic protections, not put a clamp down on development, not prevent people from building, but just make sure that they did so in a more responsible way. And so some of it is legislative, some of it is administrative, but essentially there are 4 items that the city is now going to be putting forward as part of this neighborhood protection plan. Number 1, demolition notification. When someone pulls a demo permit, Building and Safety is now going to notify council offices, and thus through council offices we can notify concerned communities about demolition permits, so people don't wake up one morning and find out that the house next to them is gone and they have no recourse. The second item, basic rules of the road for builders and contractors. So we have, Mr. President, it's pretty noisy in here.
Please ask for order in chambers. If the folks who are in the back, if I can respectfully ask you to either take your conversations outside of chambers or to please take a seat. We have plenty of room here but if we can keep conversations to a minimum, and also in front of the rope here, colleagues, I would please ask folks to keep their conversations to a minimum so we can hear the business before us. Mr. Weiss.
The second item, rules of the road. There are a series of rules and laws and regulations that builders must comply with when they are building in communities, but they don't have time to dig up all the code books and figure out all the rules, and the city never compiled the rules in one place. We're going to give people, when they pull their permits, a sheet that will list all the essential rules: times, hours, noise restrictions, parking issues, cleanup, flagmen, basic rules so people will know what to do. And at the urging of Mr. Reyes, who was absolutely right to bring this up in committee, we're going to have those sheets printed in multiple languages, and we're going to give multiple copies of this to people when they pull their permits so that their workers can get the sheet, they can know what the rules are. The third will be a job site notice. It's going to be a requirement that when people are working, they post an actual sign at the place of work that describes the scope of work, the hours of the project, and most importantly, simple telephonic contact numbers so neighbors can call the person doing the work or the person who owns the property in case there are problems. And finally, the City Attorney's Office and Building and Safety have worked really well together to try to strengthen their enforcement of infractions, because too often people who violate the rules do so again and again and again, project by project, spec house by spec house. We need to crack down on these repeat offenders, and with the help of Building and Safety and the City Attorney's Office, we're finally going to be doing that. So that is the Neighborhood Protection Plan that we're going to pass in a few moments, and I would very much appreciate an aye vote. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Mr. Weiss. Anybody else wishing to be heard on this? If not, Madam Clerk, please prepare the roll and tabulate. Oh, I'm sorry. We have a very last-minute entry. I think we technically have to reconsider that, so let's just reconsider that. If there's no objection, please open the roll, close the roll, and tabulate the vote.
14 ayes.
That is back before us, and Mr. Zine. Last minute, Dennis, go ahead.
I just have a question regarding neighborhood councils. The notifications to the council offices, is there any notification in this process to the neighborhood councils?
Mr. Weiss, would you like to answer?
On the issue of notification, I totally support this. My question is, notification to the council offices, is there any notification to the neighborhood councils or homeowner groups other than through the council office on this process?
Here's the answer to your question. On demo permits, I was seeking as much notification as we could get under the law. And the departments came back and said, look, you're dealing with by right issues. So if you live in a single-family home, you have a right to take your home down. You have a right to build a new home that's consistent with the zoning and the setbacks and the other rules in your neighborhood. And if you start layering on too much in the way of regulations in this regard, you can start to potentially legally interfere with what's by right. So we try to come up with what's a reasonable first step. A reasonable first step would be notification of council offices, and I think some sort of web posting of what they're doing. That way, all of the neighborhood councils and homeowner associations that you work with will know to be in touch with the right field deputy in their area to find out what's going on. We don't want to do anything that would inadvertently trample upon people's rights when it comes to these sort of by right issues. So
I understand that. So the question would be then, or the answer would be to the council office, we then, the council office, would make notification to our respective neighborhood council.
Yes, and there's also going to be some web notifications as well, and I'll get you the details.
Okay, thank you, thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Zine. If we can open the roll again, close the roll, and tabulate the vote.
14 ayes.
That is approved. Next item, please.
Item number 19 was called special by Councilmember Wesson, and there is an amending motion that has been distributed.
Okay. Mr.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, Mr. Wesson. Under our own council rules, if the chair of the committee would like to go first, Mr. Reyes, press this button. This is a Plum matter, I believe, with HPOZ. Did this come out of Plum Committee, Mr. Reyes? Did you press your button, Mr. Reyes, for this? Oh, I'm sorry, that was a mistake. Mr. Wesson, my apologies, please.
It's just like the era where at first I was called Mr. Weiss. It was quickly corrected.
Exactly.
I'm just proud of the way that you and Councilmember Reyes quickly corrected the other.
Very much so. We're looking forward to hearing from you.
Anyway, basically, I'd like to move the amendment that's on the desk for this item. It basically clarifies the boundaries of the HPOZ. That's it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wesson. Anybody else wishing to be heard on this? If not, please open the roll, close the roll, and tabulate the vote.
14 ayes.
All right, that is approved. Next item, please.
Next item is item number 35, and that was called special by Councilmember Smith.
Okay. I will switch out here with Ms. Perry.
What do we want to do?
I gotta speak.
35? Okay. Item 35. Okay. Item 35. First speaker is Bill Corcoran. Okay, it's already had a public hearing. All right, so I'll read this card into the record.
Well, as long as you gave the name, I'll move for one speaker. I think it's just one speaker
Okay,
for item
you're
35.
correct,
The other
yes.
ones are for item 37.
Yeah.
So I would move for one speaker, Mr. Corcoran. If there's no objection.
Thank you, honorable council members. Pleasure to be here today. I wanted to speak briefly about Sunshine Canyon landfill. Vote before you perhaps today. I am Bill Corcoran. I'm the senior regional representative for the National Sierra Club here in Southern California. And I just wanted to read a brief statement representing both the National Sierra Club and the local Angeles chapter of the Sierra Club. The Angeles chapter asked me to come and express their opposition to the extension of the city's contract with BFI and opposition to the expansion of the landfill into the city area, and to encourage the city of Los Angeles to develop an environmentally acceptable alternative for disposal of its solid waste. Compared to the leadership often demonstrated by Los Angeles, its management of solid waste marks it as a laggard. Time and again, the city has not moved aggressively enough to reduce the volume of trash dumped into Sunshine Canyon, boost recycling, and pursue alternatives to landfills. Now confronted with an all-or-nothing stance by BFI, the city has put its arm out to be twisted. Citizens are left to wonder how Renew LA will be implemented if the city signs a contract that locks the city into sending all of its trash to Sunshine Canyon and provides no enhancement of recycling capacity. The fiscal risks to communities from landfills are very real, as fiscal assurances and insurance for Sunshine Canyon, like many other landfills, are inadequate. What looks cheap today could be very expensive tomorrow. The Sierra Club will work with its labor and environmental allies and with city officials to make this the last time the city of Los Angeles puts itself and its citizens over a trash barrel. City leaders should expedite action to create a more sustainable and safer future for our city and stop our reliance on Sunshine Canyon. And as a side note, I would just like to express a real desire to see more transparency and more publicity about alternatives to landfills, and also the city's processes and how it's going to meet its announced goals of reducing trash to landfills. Thanks so much for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much. First speaker in the queue is Mr. Garcetti.
Thank you very much, Madam President, and thank you to our speaker. I think you well articulated where this council is and hopefully where we can be. Colleagues, there's a number of us that have been involved in this, and I just wanted to catch folks up. I know Mr. Parks and Ms. Gruhl, Mr. Miller, and I know our two chairs of the relevant committees, Ms. Perry and Mr. Smith, have been very steeped in this as well. When I last spoke to this body, we had expressed some frustration about not being able to talk directly to principals, not just either at BFI, but their parent company, Allied Waste. On Friday afternoon, Mr. Parks, myself, Ms. Gruhl, and Mr. Miller were able to talk by phone with one of the principals at Allied Waste. And we made the very strong argument, A, that as one of the largest customers of BFI and Allied Waste, that we deserved the respect of that meeting. And that was well communicated, and that respect came back to us, and we appreciated that. We also laid forth very clearly what we've said openly is the same thing that, what we said privately was the same thing that we have said here openly, that we have adopted a policy in this body that moves us away from landfilling at a population center that's close to the city, namely Sunshine Canyon, but also to do just what the representative from the Sierra Club mentioned, which is for overall to reduce our trash production, which the Bureau, with direction from this council, has begun to do, especially looking at the region and the city, not just at single-family homes and the apartment buildings that we pick up from, but the large apartment buildings and commercial hauling as well. We did not have much progress in that phone call on Friday. They said repeatedly, vote the contract up or vote it down, and we're always happy to renegotiate either way. We said, why would we vote it up and have no leverage in a conversation? And similarly, why would we vote it down and drive off a cliff together when we could have a third way? That argument seems to have made some impression, and over the weekend, we had information that they are willing to essentially give us the time to have the conversation that would be necessary, that it wouldn't be able to happen in 3 or 4 days. But we identified March 17th as a good date for us to be able to engage in those face-to-face conversations, that deadline to have the face-to-face conversations by. This letter, which we also are making copies available for the public so everybody can see, from BFI to myself, said that if we would vote to extend the contract today, we would have till the 17th to, if we can't come to a common agreement, to 100% rescind that contract. So essentially it is this extension until the 17th, and I would ask for your support of this today so that any of us who want to engage in the negotiations, whether I think maybe the CLA's office is the appropriate body to engage directly in those, but we can decide that as a body. But to have those negotiations, it gives us that window. I know Mr. Smith, in my discussions with the mayor, Mr. Parks, Ms. Gruhl, everybody I've talked to seems to agree that this is a good way forward to get us to our goal of what we need to do. So it would be my motion today to vote to extend on item 35, conditioned on this letter, which the city attorney in our conversations has assured us is legally binding, so we still have 100% of the power to completely reject the contract if we do not have mutual agreement on any amendments by the 17th. And to continue item 36, which gives us the options, but direct the CLA's office to let us know where the diversion of trash will go. We've been given a number of options, and we need now, Mr. Huizar raised this, and I think very appropriately, where exactly will the trash go? I think we have a couple of good options. I won't be directly involved. I've asked Mr. Smith and Ms. Perry as the relevant chairs of the committees to work that out with the CLA's office and invite, of course, any other input on that. So that is what is before us today, an 11th hour extension that the Allied Waste and BFI have put forward to us in a way that's ironclad for us. I hope you'll support that, and in these next, I guess it's almost 18 days then, be able to move forward with the policy that we adopted here in Council. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Garcetti. Next speaker is Mr. Parks.
Thank you, Madam President. I would just, again, having said in that meeting, I think it's important that all of us understand what our timelines and what our expectations are. This gets us moving in the sense of approving the 5-year contract, but it gives us 18 days to negotiate what we put on the table as far as our motion, and then they certainly have things that they'd like to put on the table. If we do nothing in 18 days, we've approved the contract. If we come back with a new proposal, then those are the things that will get voted on. So I think it's important to understand exactly where we are with this. It's kind of reverse of where we started. We wanted more time to negotiate. They came back, and that's what negotiations are. They came up with their idea, but it's clear they have some ideas that they want to discuss with us. But again, I think we set the parameters as to what's good for the city. Clearly, there's been a desire to move some of the trash out of the urban area. There's a desire to keep the costs as low as possible so that we can not just move the trash and cost more money. We also have had a desire as part of Renew LA to start looking at waste sheds throughout the city so that we can begin to look at trash maybe staying in the areas collected, but yet we still have to ensure that wherever it goes, it's going to go in an area that we're not going to raise the cost significantly to the public. So those are the key elements that I came out of the meeting with, and it was not an easy process because in the first several minutes, I think the guy said no more than he said anything else, but after the phone conversation, it came back and said, here's the best we can do, which I think is reasonable, even to the point of the letter that we have lays it out. The issue that they have some complications as far as a face-to-face meeting takes a little time, but yet it gives a chance for us to evolve as to what we think is important. So I would hope that we would unanimously vote today to start this process, knowing that 18 days we have the ability to work on what's best for the city and that negotiation. And then when it comes back, we then all get a chance to either say, leave it as it is, it's already in place, or here are some elements that are of greater benefit to the city. And if it's greater benefit to the city, then we should be certainly happy to look at that and get it resolved. And so I'd ask we move on it and get the process moving.
Thank you, Mr. Parks. Our next speaker is Mr. Rosendahl.
I just want to applaud my colleagues and their leadership and getting together with BFI, coming up with options and alternatives. And when Mr. President talked about the recycling, I'll be putting in a motion later this week that all new construction for be it MDUs of condos or apartments must have the recycling capability built within those structures, not only the chutes, but the locations for the bins. Secondly, I really feel that sanitation needs to be clearer about what's recyclable and not. I brought up in committee that maybe coat hangers should be in it. There was a hem and a haw, and now, yes, it's part of it. We need to have complete clarity as to what goes into the blue bin, goes into the green bin, goes into the black bin, and we need to market that as clearly as 1, 2, 3. We need to put actual seals on our garbage containers, and when we open it, we can see what we can put in. Because if we do the kind of recycling, both in new construction and in our personal commitment to it, it will have a huge impact about what goes into landfills. Secondly, I think we are saying as a city, as the Sierra Club said, that it's time to get beyond landfills, especially landfills near people. I mean, there is a definite health relationship between that landfill and people. I mean, I went there, walked around, I could smell it, you could hear it and feel it and all of that. And so in the long run, we as a city have to bite the bullet on alternative strategies to landfill. I am just thrilled with Greg Smith's leadership and his tenacity and his doggedness on this one, and everybody else from Mr. Parks, Mr. Garcetti, and my colleague up there, who's the president right now, Jan Perry, and all of you for your leadership, and we're moving in the right direction. Thanks, everybody.
Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Madam President. Just for the record, Mr. Garcetti, as president, asked that Mr. Perry and I have a meeting. So we have just discussed the fact that we're going to have a joint meeting on the issue of, first of all, where we're going to go with that 600-ton diversion, what it will cost. And secondly, we're going to go back to the Sanitation Bureau and ask them how we're going to do the next year, that other 1,000 tons we've talked about in the motion of last Friday. So we will do that. I want to remind you that last year, this council said we want to renegotiate our contract. We didn't like the terms of the contract because it was not favorable to the city. And under the strong leadership of Mr. Padilla at the time as president of the council, we said we want to negotiate. BFI said never, no, we will not negotiate. And the council said in a separate action then, too bad, we're not going to extend your contract, we want to negotiate. And at 5 o'clock on Friday, the day the contract ran out, a letter was slipped into Mr. Padilla's hands at 5 o'clock saying we're ready to talk. We talked. We got a better contract. Then we came out and said, we still don't like dealing with BFI. We're not happy with the way the whole terms are. And the BFI said, we won't talk, we won't talk. And we went ahead as a council and said, nope, we're not going to approve the contract. And guess what? 5 o'clock in the afternoon, in comes BFI with a letter saying, we'll give you an extension until February. So twice they've done this. Now, last week, they said, we won't talk, we won't talk, we won't talk, we will not negotiate. And we, council, on Friday, passed a policy saying we're going to go forward with this contract the way we want it, not the way you want it. And on the next couple of days, here's BFI again with a letter to us right now, the day of the deadline, saying, okay, we're going to extend this and we will talk. It's been a pattern and practice with these folks that they do when you force them to negotiate and talk. And so we are truly in a strong position because of Mr. Padilla's leadership last year and Mr. Garcetti's incredible leadership throughout this process that's brought BFI to the table and make them work with us. I want to reiterate, finally, that we did pass a resolution last week that said we're going to reduce our tonnage and we're going to meet the policy of August last year in a 5-year phase-out of BFI. And that is this council's policy, and that is what is on the table to negotiate. And I hope that we will not back down from that. We made a very strong statement unanimously last week. We will not back down for that. That is our policy. And we'll go forward and give BFI a chance to come to the table and say, here's what we want out of you in exchange for that. and that will be the overguiding policy that Mr. Garcetti and the negotiating team will take in, and I'm very pleased that we're doing that. To the Sierra Club, I just say thank you for finally being here. We've been fighting BFI for a decade now, and it's nice that you're finally with us. I'm glad to see you. As far as those options you've talked about, we introduced that plan last year. It's called Renew LA. We'd love to have you and come and brief you on it. We've been very open about this. We've had hearing after hearing on it, and we are moving to a city of sustainability that will not use landfills. We will be a no landfill city, and we are going to convert our trash to energy and useful products, and we'd love to have you come in and talk about that. So thank you for being with us today. To the council, again, this is a restatement of our policy of last week. There's an opportunity to negotiate, and I thank Mr. Garcetti again for making it possible.
Thank you very much, Mr. Smith. Mr. Weiss.
Thank you, Madam President. I have a question for the city attorney. Who's the city attorney who can answer questions about this letter?
Hold your time. Would you like to hold your time?
If you could hold my time, please, yes.
Just remind all members to ask for their time to be held when they're not speaking.
Mr. Smith was making me laugh. I'm sorry. It was good, too. Mr. Westhoff, I've read the letter dated Feb 27, 2006 from BFI to the city. It says, should the City Council elect to approve the extension today, BFI will provide the Council until March 17 to rescind this extension if an alternate contract with alternate language is not agreed upon. What does that phrase mean? Hold my time, please.
Well, Christopher Westhoff, Assistant City Attorney, Public Works General Counsel. Councilmember, it means that if the council acts and extends the contract by 5 o'clock, which is today's the deadline to
Council,
extend.
by an 8-vote margin, votes to approve the contract by today.
You would have to approve the extension in order for the option that exists in that letter to take effect. The opposite would be if you took no action today, then that letter would obviously become null and void, and the city would lose the option to extend the contract.
Let's assume there are 8 votes for the extension today. What does this 18-day extension actually legally mean?
It allows the city council and I'm assuming staff to get together with BFI and negotiate. I'm assuming the 3 points that were put forth in the motion that was passed by the council last Friday, 2 of which have already been agreed to by BFI the last time we were negotiated with them. The one point in that motion that was passed on Friday that needs to be discussed with BFI is the removal of a waste shed from the waste stream that goes into BFI. That would need to be negotiated with them, and then obviously any other terms and conditions obviously that BFI would like to negotiate in return for the council removing that waste shed from the waste stream that goes into BFI. If an agreement is reached by the 17th that is acceptable to both sides, the extension stays in place and everything is the status quo that is voted on today, plus the amendment that would be passed by the 17th. If both sides cannot agree to the terms and conditions of a contract amendment by the 17th of March, then the council has an option at that point to take another vote to rescind the action that it takes today.
Okay, so that's the key point I just want to focus on, and tell me if I'm incorrect. Bottom line, this is an 8-vote item for us today, the extension. Bottom line, if there's no meeting of the minds between the two parties between now and March 17, it will require another 8-vote action of the council to rescind today's approval.
That is absolutely correct.
Okay. One final note I want to, that's just critical, and I hope everyone understands that. That means that today, in a sense, is final passage, and if there is a mutually agreeable agreement, then there is. If there's not, today became final passage. I just want to register my concerns over going down the road, whether it's removing this waste shed or whatever, if that will cost the city millions of dollars. I've heard different estimates for what these waste shed removals will cost. Some people say it will cost a couple $1 million. Who knows? I'm sure there are differences of opinion. But look, yesterday the Public Safety Committee heard from the LAPD about the avalanche of cases that is going to hit the LAPD when DNA that is in the state data bank starts being made to DNA of perpetrators, of actual murderers and rapists who are at loose in society right now, whose cases have not been made. We will need a couple $1 million to increase LAPD's detective and criminalist resources to make these cases, to take these murderers and rapists off the streets. Those are the priorities I think we should have for our scarce millions of dollars in this city budget. If we are making decisions to put millions of dollars into a waste shed when it won't in fact improve the quality of life of people who end up living near the dump in the first place, I have real concerns. I want that on the table today, and I know that others have those concerns, and I think that's an important part of this debate.
Thank you, Mr. Weiss. Next speaker is Ms. Gruhl.
Is who?
Ms. Gruhl?
Oh, sorry, I couldn't hear you say my name. Thank you very much, Madam President. Just want to ask one question, so a little bit in the following of Mr. Weiss's, that this letter is legally binding if we adopt as you described, correct? That is a legally binding document. Okay. Colleagues, just to add to what Mr. Parks and Mr. Garcetti talked about as our discussions with Allied BFI on Friday, they asked us what was different, what was unusual, had anything changed? And we were very clear that what had changed is this council unanimously on Friday said, we want to move forward with reducing how much we put in Sunshine Canyon. We want to do that with the one wayshed as we adopted on Friday. That was different than we had told them in the past, and the unanimity of this council. And I think what we have heard in the last several discussions and over the 8 months, that there is some agreement of, one, reducing our dependence on landfills, reducing our dependence on Sunshine Canyon, looking at recycling across this city, and I think it's a great idea, Mr. Rosendahl, on the design and planning, and I know Ed will make that happen as well in the Plum Committee, that we need to look at all of our options. And they did say no to the extension, and the conversation ended in a way that we were not sure whether or not they were going to come forward. But we felt very comfortable saying to BFI that this council was united. And that's what we're asking today, for this council again to be united, so that they know when they're negotiating with us in the next 2 weeks that they have a united council. That has not always been the case. And so that allows us to have that kind of leverage and that discussion that we felt was so critically important, and why we didn't agree to, we'll just vote on it and then, oh, maybe we'll do something. As I said in that conversation, that gave us no leverage. And even though you know, I haven't negotiated with them in the past, and this was my first conversation with them, I indicated, I said, you know, we've done a lot of deals in the city, and we know what leverage is and what leverage isn't. And that is why this is so important today, that we have that letter for the leverage to make sure, and to acknowledge some of Mr. Weiss's comments. We all agree that we need to ensure that how we're looking at that we balance everything, financial, impact on communities, and all of that. That is the kind of thing we're going to do within this 2-week period of time. This is what we're going to make happen, and we're going to stand up and say we're serious about this negotiation. So I would ask, in addition to my colleagues, that we have a unanimous vote today on this item, and that in the next 2 weeks, any of you, all of us, will be part of that negotiation to again send that clear message that we are serious about not dumping in our communities, and we are serious about being fiscally responsible, and we're serious about what we adopted last Friday, which allows us to reduce our dependence on landfills and Sunshine Canyon. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Gruhl. Next speaker is Mr. Padilla.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and colleagues. Sounds like I'm going to be a dissenting voice this morning. I have a big problem with what we're being asked to support today. I am the only council member still here who was around the last time we voted on the contract extension. And as I said back in September, I'm going to vote now just the same way I voted 5 years ago, and that's against extending the contract with Sunshine Canyon. I've been very clear on that. I've been very consistent on that. And just from my point of view, here's what I've observed over the last 6, 7 months or so. We were up on a deadline, which we heard from both staff, unfortunately, and BFI, was a hard and fast deadline. There was no way to move that deadline. And as Mr. Smith reminded us. All of a sudden, a deadline that was hard and fast became fluid, and all of a sudden we had 2 weeks to move, to renegotiate or rethink. Then that 2 weeks became another 6 months, and here we are today. And as our council president, Councilmember Smith and Parks, been wanting to meet with the higher-ups of this company and have been unable to do so, when they were just a phone call away for our mayor 6 months ago, what's going on? And while on the surface level, their offer to continue to talk between now and March 17th, which is just a few weeks away, sounds good, it's only on the condition, as I read their letter, that we approve the 5-year contract first, and then they're willing to talk? Colleagues, what position are we putting ourselves in? What position are we putting the city of Los Angeles in? If they were genuinely willing to talk and meet somewhere in the middle, there wouldn't be these requirements to approve the 5-year deal first. And we can go back and forth on the legal language and do we have an out clause or can we rescind, can we reconsider, and all of that. But I don't think this is the good faith negotiations with the city. And I think we should get out of sunshine, which is what everybody around here has been saying, finally put action to the words that we've been spouting and move on with this issue.
Thank you, Mr. Padilla. Next speaker is Mr. Zine.
Thank you, Madam President. I know that Mr. Garcetti and the other members of the council have been working on this, have been putting a lot of time and effort into it, and I see members of the community who are here who have been tenacious with their persistence to try and hold us true to our word about making some changes on this and eliminating this continuing saga. And this is a continuing saga, as we've seen it go on for days and weeks and months. And I asked our city attorney, the man who deals with the paperwork, with the contracts, the issue that Mr. Padilla just brought up. We approve this today. We're agreeing to this contract. In the event that there's no agreement in the next days when the discussion continues, because last week there was a question whether they wanted to talk or not. And now we're looking at it to say, what are we going to do? Say yes today to a contract and bargaining where we want to reduce the tonnage going in. We want to have alternatives. The view from you that's going to be dealing with this on a legal standard.
Well, obviously the council has a policy decision to make as to whether it wishes to accept what is written in the letter from BFI to the city council.
Is that binding? Is that letter binding?
Yes, it is. I mean, it in essence requires an action by the council today, which you are capable of rescinding by March 17th. So it requires 2 actions. If the council acts today and approves the extension and takes no further action, the extension is in full force and effect for the 5 years of the extension, unless the city chooses to breach that agreement. If the council acts today, doesn't act today, then you lose the option to extend the contract with BFI completely.
But we still have a buffer zone right now.
You have, if you act today, you have 17 days to rescind that action.
And that is an agreement of both parties if
Correct.
we act today.
Correct.
So the condition is we could rescind it. We could say go back, discuss, do these issues, but we're not bound if we come back within 17 days and say, we want to do something else.
If you are not satisfied with the way the negotiations go between tomorrow and March 17th, the council may act on March 17th or a day prior to March 17th to rescind the action that the council takes today to extend the extension.
And do something entirely different if we wish to do so. Correct. Meanwhile, hopefully, there's been some light shed upon from last week when we hoped that it would continue, that the negotiations over the weekend would bring some type of positive response, and apparently it has brought a positive response in the result of a letter.
Two of the 3 deal points that were in the council motion passed last Friday have already been agreed upon by BFI in an amendment. They are willing to sign that amendment. The one deal point that was not discussed with BFI, at least until recently, was the removal of a waste shed from the waste stream that goes into the landfill. Right. And that is what needs to be negotiated, and whatever other points that BFI wishes to renegotiate with the city, because again, renegotiation is a two-way street. I'm sure they have deal points that they want to bring to the table as well over the next 17 days.
And it comes to the point we can't continue to ignore it, has been maybe the history of many years. We've got to dump, let's just keep dumping there and let someone else worry about it. We now come to the point where we're going to worry about it and do something about it.
That's a policy decision for the city
And
council.
Mr. Smith, you totally support this approval today? And I know that you're the one who's been championing the cause for the people of the city, and particularly San Fernando Valley. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ziner. Next speaker is Mr. Reyes.
Thank you, Madam President. I'd like to call up the Public Works officials. We have our commissioner with us, and I see the director, Ms. Robinson and company. I'd just like to come to the table, please, have some questions. Please hold my time.
Good morning.
Good morning, Commissioner. Just wait for Ms. Robinson, that way we'll have a full crew here. Again, this is about how we are able to move. I think what we're trying to do is something we need to do. At the same time, what we need to do and what we can do are not always the same. So with that in mind, if we renew the contract with BFI, are able to negotiate diverting one watershed from Sunshine Canyon, are we prepared to do that in the beginning in July? If we are successful in peeling away that watershed, are we ready to do that? And what changes will the City of LA have to be, what changes do we have to commit to in order to comply with that? Please hold my time.
Well, I think that the motion that you have before you is a good motion. I'd like to commend Council President Garcetti. And I think that by negotiating with BFI at this point, one waste shed out of it, we can be ready come July 1st. If BFI agrees to it, yes, we will be ready.
So what would it take? Where would that trash go?
Well, there's two options that are before us. The two options are sending it to El Sobrante in Riverside, which is about 60 miles away. The other option would be sending it to Avenal, which is about 180 miles away. So I think that would, if I understood Council Member Smith earlier, is that there's going to be a joint meeting to decide which is better.
Now, I did receive a letter from Corona, the city of Corona, that they are asking us not to send the trash their way. They don't want the trucks, they don't want the debris, they don't want the impact. And they are essentially against that particular option. If they take us to court, will that stop us from being able to exercise that? Do we understand those impacts?
Well, I have personally not seen that letter.
I'll get a copy.
So I cannot comment on something I haven't reviewed yet.
Yes.
And in terms of the legal issues of it, I think the city attorney would be a better person to answer that.
Councilmember, the Waste Management, which owns the El Sobrante landfill, has all of the permits required by law to take refuse into that landfill, and I cannot imagine a legal action that would prevent us from driving down public roads to get to a lawfully permitted landfill to dispose of our trash. So I don't believe that there are any viable, at this point, legal options for them to prevent us from taking waste into El Sobrante.
What I'd like to do is send you a copy of the letter that I have, so we can comment that, have a comment on in writing, so we understand what our positions
Yes, we've been
are.
in contact with Corona, with the Board of Supervisors of Riverside County, which is what the agreement is with, not the city of Corona. And we understand the letter was from the city manager of Corona, not the mayor of Corona. So we will look at the letter once we receive a copy and review it.
And if we're going to be sending the trash elsewhere, those trucks will be traveling through other neighborhoods as well. Is our infrastructure, are we prepared to deal with those impacts on those other neighborhoods that will have to absorb the new traffic flow since they're not going to their original destination?
With Rita Robinson, Bureau of Sanitation, we're prepared to discuss with the Joint Committee the road of least resistance in this diversion of 600 tons. We would be ready to show ways that it would not be as much impact regarding where it would go, the waste shed which makes the most sense to divert where, so that you would be informed as to what impact it would have. But it wouldn't be a significant impact because that 600 tons has to go somewhere anyway, so.
Right, I understand that, and this is where I get a little nervous, in that if each one of us understood where our industrial zones are in our respective districts, those become potential destinations for that waste. So are we ready to deal with that mitigation?
We would be ready to discuss with you where the impact would be, because at this point, we're looking at which waste sheds would have to travel the shortest amount of distance in order to get to either Avenal or El Sobrante.
So we'll get a map from you, you'll give us a route, we'll know which ones will be going on freeways versus surface streets versus residential corridors, hopefully not, and just deal with those routes so we understand the impacts on respective neighborhoods, correct?
Correct.
Fantastic.
And we have had some internal discussions, and if one waste shed, depending on what waste shed it is, can come from our current transfer station and go out to Riverside or El Sobrante, and most of that would be done on freeways, not surface streets.
Right, and again, just in closing, I just want to reiterate my verbal motion, which echoes my original motion from my original amendment, and that is that to include language to protect other communities of this city that may be zone industrial from potential waste disposal in the event that BFI does not accept the city's provisions. So again, we want that understanding, that language, and that strategy in place as well. So just keeping everything on the table and in front of us, and transparent.
Thank you, Mr. Reyes. Next speaker is Ms. Hahn.
Thank you, Madam President. I think you just answered one of the questions I was going to ask was, would the majority of this trash, if we decided to take it somewhere else, go by our trucks, or would it be taken to a transfer station first, the one in Carson, and then trucked out on the semis to El Sobrante?
We can discuss a number of ways that it could go, but our hope is to do a more direct route situation. We'd like to take a path of least impact, is what I mean. And so we can map out a number of ways this could be done. But 600 tons could be done in a number of ways, but our hope would be to do it with the least amount of impact as possible.
What's the percentage of our trash truck fleet that is uses alternative fuel?
My recollection is almost half, because it's the valley and we're rolling out more and more each year. So we're almost there.
I think, colleagues, this has certainly been an interesting process, and I will really stand up and applaud Greg Smith for your tenacity and your perseverance. And you've probably been vindicated a lot in terms of, you've known a long time that BFI was a difficult company to work with, to negotiate with, and I think some of the other council members who have now been involved in that have seen that. And I will say, as a customer of BFI, I want to go on record saying I think the way they have treated us and the way they have been unavailable for meetings and the way they have only been willing to negotiate only when their backs were up against the wall is unfortunate. We're a large city, we're a large customer, we've put a lot of money in their pockets, and they're in the business of trash. We have trash, but it's been really disheartening to watch how they treated us through this process. As you know, I was one of those who voted against extending this contract last time because I felt like unless we make that firm stand to say we are no longer going to take our trash there would never have been room for negotiation. There would never have been room for this city to talk about alternatives. And the one good thing I think has come out of this, sort of like what's come out of this sort of port security debacle recently in the last week. It's the first time I think the nation has been talking about port security. Well, I think this is the first time we've actually begun having a civic debate about trash, about how much trash Los Angeles generates, and how we must make ourselves less dependent on landfill. So in that respect, this has been good, and I think Renew LA is an excellent proposal long term. What we are really still far behind our Northern California friends, who literally, their recycling is their largest bin, their trash is a very small amount that they put out weekly. And until we get to that point, until we grow up another generation of young people, we should be teaching this in the schools, really to get to a point where literally it's a crime for us personally to put something in the trash bin that could actually be recycled. We've got to figure out a way to reduce the amount of trash that has to be sent to the landfill. I'm a little nervous today, but I will stand united with this council if this is what we want to do, to extend this contract with the belief that we will begin to continue to negotiate and, if need be, rescind this in a couple of weeks. I hope this council will stand firm. I hope we have the 8 votes to rescind this if, in fact, BFI does not negotiate a contract that is good for the city. And part of what I know we all believe is good for the city is to, in some way, not truck our trash to neighborhoods which have long really suffered the burdens and see little benefit. But nobody wants our trash, so what we need to do is reduce the amount of trash that we're actually sending to the landfill. So I applaud your leadership, all of you. I'm nervous doing this today, basically just because I've not seen good faith effort on behalf of BFI as they have negotiated this change. And it's our right to change our policy about what we do with our trash, and that's up to us, and that's our responsibility for our constituents. So I'll vote with the council today.
Thank you, Ms. Hahn. Next speaker is Mr. Huizar.
In terms of timing, when will we reach a decision as to where the 600 tons will go? Please hold my time.
Well, Councilman, that's going to depend on how discussions go, in the next couple of weeks. Obviously, BOS, through the latest process, did get some options, and there were some cost implications on those. But to date, we've not been authorized to actually sit down with someone to try to flesh out the terms of the contract. That's one thing we would try to do to the best of our collective ability in the next 17 or 18 days.
I've been on this council for about 2.5 months, going on 3 months. Ever since I got here, there's been discussions about several options. It seems that you have gone pretty much down the line as to what the other options are. I've seen, sheet after sheet of cost estimates of potential environmental impacts. If we do go other places, we should have a very good sense of what those options are at this point, aren't they? Please hold my
We
time.
do, and we have a sense of which options to focus on. But the bottom line is, until you look someone else in the eye and say, put your money where your mouth is and let's look at a contract, we can't say for certain that those other options, in fact, are going to materialize.
Okay. And these 600 tons that we're taking elsewhere, as compared to the Sunshine Canyon landfill, we're talking 5 million difference potentially, 10 million, 20 million, 30 million? Give me an estimate about what the difference is.
That's going to depend entirely on what the rate would be on the balance of the trash at Sunshine.
Please hold my time.
And until we enter discussions with BFI, assuming that we were to move...
But you've already estimated. I mean, you've already been discussed generally. What are the cost estimates? I have a sheet here. I could, I have one.
Well, I think that
30 million.
I mean, the range essentially is about 2 million to 30 million, depending upon how much trash is moved and what the...
So we're being asked today to vote on something where we could be saying, hey, it may cost our general fund budget $2 million or $30 million, depending on what we decide after we approve this contract. Is that what's being asked?
Well, I think what's before you today is you're being asked by BFI to vote on extending the contract, which wouldn't cost anything incremental, but to provide 18 days for staff to come back to you and define what costs would be if some of the trash were diverted elsewhere. So you're not committing any money today.
Okay, but the idea is within 18 days, we may or may not rescind this contract, but we will not have made a decision on where the 600 tons will go.
Again, I can't anticipate necessarily what's going to happen in the next 18 days. My hope would be in 18 days we can come back and tell you precisely where it should go and that we have a deal in hand. But that's going to depend on the responsiveness of the other parties.
And I think we've discussed quite a bit what those other options are, and I'm not sure where we are, but I think 18 days is a reasonable amount of time. Perhaps we would want this council to come back before those 18 days and tell us what those options are. And I'd like to make an amendment, if possible, to put that with today's motion
that we have some timing when the Joint Committee comes back to us before those 18 days and says, this is what we're recommending. Because quite frankly, I agree with a lot of what's been said here in terms of the environmental impacts, having these landfills close to our residents, et cetera. We're faced with a lot of tough decisions, but within this realm of making tough decisions, I would like to have as much information as possible before I make that decision. We're not only talking dollars, potentially $10 to $30 million. We're also talking environmental impacts on who else is going to be affected. It's a trade-off here. It's not a free ride. So before we make this huge decision, I would like to see a clearer picture. And I think we have both the time and the research that has happened up until now that it's not going to take much for us to get there. And I think this question, if you could please hold my time, is possibly more directed at Councilmember Smith. If it's possible with your joint committee that you're going to have, do you think you could come back within 18 days?
Yes, we have a committee agenda for March 7th, and I just told staff, let's get that on the agenda. Ms. Perry's already agreed to have a joint committee meeting so we can get it all done at once. So staff, let's start getting ready to have that discussion on March 7th, and we'll make sure it's calendared.
Mr. President, just to remind council, your council's in recess the 10th, the 14th, and the 15th.
You know that.
As a point of information, colleagues, and just talking to everybody, it looks like folks will not be leaving to National League of Cities generally until the next day, Saturday. So I will be moving to schedule council on the 10th, so we will be having that council meeting. Just doing a straw poll from everybody so far walking around. Okay.
So, thank you. I'd like to make a motion at this time, and I hope I get a second, haven't discussed with anybody. If we could make, to have the Joint Committee come back to us with sufficient time with a recommendation before the expiration of the 18 days, that would give us ample time to either rescind our vote today or not. Thank you.
Next speaker is Mr. Garcetti.
Thank you, Madam President, and thank you, colleagues. Thank you, Mr. Rosendahl, for the motion you're putting forward. It hit exactly nail on the head in terms of what Mr. Smith's been working on, other people have been talking about, Mr. Reyes with the plastic bags has done. We don't need to be in this place if we all work together, the Bureau and us, and and I want to be very clear, we've proven ourselves in the past. We're not just LA standing here saying, God, it would be nice if we did stuff. We've surpassed state mandates for recycling goals. We've done a very good job, but we know there's so much more we can do. So let's build on our strengths, our proven strengths, as a Bureau, as a city, and move forward with the reduction, because we don't have to be here next year. Remember, if we have similar form to any contract with BFI around Sunshine, it says if we reduce our overall trash, as opposed to diverting it, there's no punishment in the price for our reduction, for our good behavior, in other words. That's a good public policy incentive in there, and I know that it's a goal of Mr. Smith's, it's in Renew LA. I look around this entire horseshoe, I know it's a goal of folks. Ms. Hans has experience in this industry. I know Mr. Weiss is a proven environmentalist, Ms. Perry as well. We can do that, and in this coming year we must do that, and with the Bureau, we will, during budget time, look at how we can help you to do that. Let's see if we can get this next year reduction of 600 tons or whatever it is to be consistent with our policy through reducing our waste overall. I really feel that we can be. Secondly, I want to say clearly that I appreciate the sentiments that have been said around here. It is and I understand that people are saying, well, what's the difference between just an extension and this one? It is the same thing in that if they'd given us just a blank extension or this, 18 days from now is a moment of truth for us. Do we vote this up 100% or down 100%, or does BFI with us actually find a third way, which is one step forward, an important step forward to prove to ourselves we can do something the mayor agrees upon, something the leaders on this council agree upon, the chairs of the two committees agree upon, that we can actually take this one step. And it's not new policy, it is what we adopted. It is what we adopted. So I appreciate the sentiments of some, and I want to be clear with our friends over at the Sunshine Canyon dump, and we appreciate them sitting down with us now. We really do appreciate that. We believe that we deserve that, and it's proper respect. It's not a favor, but we do appreciate that. And that's an important place to begin our discussions. And those discussions should be about how we resolve this, not how they tell us why we can't move anything and that they'll make more money, because we know that it will take more time and they don't have people necessarily lined up there to fill all the space. And we think that their future as a company and in returning shareholder value, as I believe Mr. Parks put into the motion, last time we discussed this, is in joining the bureaus of sanitation of the country and the cities in showing how we can get beyond landfilling. Whatever companies do that first are going to have huge growth potential in this country and in this world as we see landfills hitting the wall, and not just because of space reasons, but because of health reasons as well. So I ask folks to hold tight. This is the right way to enter our discussions and our negotiations. We appreciate our partners being at that table, and more than that, we appreciate them not only keeping an open mind, but resolving this. If we cannot resolve this with them, and we're not talking about something that resolves it by saying 100% diversion this year or not. If we can't resolve this with them, we are only given two extreme options. And how we are treated in terms of the open-minded of this will inform a lot of us, I believe, who've not necessarily been as, if I can use this term with a Republican radical, as Mr. Smith. And they should know that very loud and clear. And I want to send that signal, though I appreciate them being at the table.
Thank you, Mr. Garcetti. Our next speaker for the second time, Mr. Rosendahl.
Yeah, I rise for a second time because I remember 6 months ago, we had a gun to the head, and they gave us this ultimatum. You either had to do it now or drop dead and all that kind of stuff. And it ended up being extended for 6 months. This is a little bit similar to that, but on the other hand, it does give us the flexibility over the next 2 weeks, and I appreciate my colleague, Jose Huizar, in clearing it up so that we get back to the table. But Rita, when you were here 6 months ago, we had no options, we had no alternatives, there was nothing we could do, we could never do anything else. Where are we today?
Well, last time we didn't have an option because the one option we had pulled out of the RFP process. So we did have an option at that time. At this point, we have two options that are on the table, as we have discussed before, two vendors that came forth, MDSI and Waste Management, for if we want to go to another landfill. And we also have other options for, providing other diversion of our waste shed, either through recycling, which are packages in the budget for that, and with regard to other reductions over the years in accordance to your policies. So we've costed out those options as well. So we'll be ready to discuss mainly the other waste stream that exists other than the 100,000 tons we talked about 6 months ago that could go from black to blue. And as I just said, that 10% of the waste shed that we know could go from black to blue easily with education and enforcement and non-contamination and all the pieces of that puzzle put together and a public campaign, we could do that part, and that part's in the budget for right now to move forward. If we go to 1,000 tons down, then we're talking about food waste. And organic waste being pulled from the black can to the green can if we want to go to composting, or separated in a purple can if we want to do that. But we can look at all the other options and cost them out with regard to how we would want to reduce that organic waste. That would take our 750,000 customers, hand-holding the process with regard to how they would do that. That would mean your pizza boxes, your paper plates that are being used, your napkins that have been soiled. Those are the kinds of things you would have to separate separately, put in a plastic bag, and put in the green container in order to reduce that waste. We've looked at, the staff has been working very effectively on that over the last 6 months to look at how we would do that. What capacity do we have for that in the Southern California region? Where we would have to take that to, it has to go somewhere, and how that would impact our green waste recycling, because then it would be, our green waste recycling would have to take a different venue. So those cost figures and that process we can discuss in the joint committee and come up with ideas. I mean, there are a number of different ways that we could go with that, but there are ways to do this in the future. So as we've said, the Bureau said all along, there are alternatives. It's in regard to how we approach those alternatives and the time frames involved. We like to pilot some of this to see if, in fact, how it works, how it deals with constituents. Getting 7 people to do something, getting 15 people to do something is stressful. Getting 750,000 people to do it can be, interesting. So we will continue to work forward in that direction, and you have our full support in that, in making those things happen.
And
It's very
Councilmember,
important. Please.
If I might add, what's the difference between 6 months ago and now? Well, the simple answer is RFP 3. We went back out to the industry and said, okay, give us your options. So through that process and through the leadership of Councilmember Smith and his involvement in RFP3, we were able to come up with more options. Now, as a department, we can only respond to the proposals that we received. So, however, as a council, you have better options to be able to kind of mix and match. So, in a nutshell, the difference between now and then, RFP3.
Okay. The most important thing from my perspective is once we get beyond this moment, I don't want to drop this and come up with it again in 4 years. The most important thing for us to do is to create alternatives now, timetables now, accountability now on all of the other options. This word purple bin sounds interesting to me. Most importantly, of course, is the recycling with timetables. Is it still, Rita, 36 months that we could have it universal in the city?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. You know, I mean, in terms of multifamily, yes.
Multifamilies and commercial,
In commercial,
everybody.
yes. Well, all of it would be a public campaign that would involve our partners in multifamily and commercial, as well as those that affect our tonnage itself. So diversion from landfills in general would be addressed, as well as the city's diversion from landfills would be addressed. So as you discussed earlier, it would be a regional approach that would have a campaign.
And we will also look at sites where we might take garbage and do something else like incinerate or other aspects.
We'll continually. URS is well on its way of looking at those alternatives along with Renew LA. So as I said, it's a long-term, wide highway of options that will get us there. They each have their own time frame, they each have their own options, and they each have their own price tag. So all of those things in context, we'd like the city, as Mr. Weezer said, to have a fully informed arena of information, so that as you make your decision, you understand the layering of what those costs will be, because it will be layering. As you have, you know, if you have a contract with BFI or not, or if you don't have one with BFI, then that'll be a cost. But as you add on other programs, recycling programs and other things, those costs also would have to be identified, so that you don't, you know, when you buy the house as is, you also understand you need a front door, so that you make sure you have money for your front door.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rosendahl. Mr. Cardenas, to be followed by Ms. Perry, and then Mr. Smith, Mr. Padilla, and Mr. Parks.
Thank you, Mr. President. Listening to the debate and all the questions, it's been a good discussion, but I just want to make sure I clarify for those people who are looking to write something or film this or what have you and tell the public who weren't watching today what's going on. We're not making a final decision today. Today, we're not making a final decision on anything. All we're doing today is giving ourselves 18 more days to look at what options we've been told about before, to re-look at the numbers, dollar amounts as to what it costs in order to exercise other options. And also I want to remind people of Northridge and Los Angeles that whatever we do today and whatever we do 18 days from now, between now and July 1st, the same trucks will roll, the same trash will meet its final destination as it did last night and the day before and the day before. I think it's really important for people not to walk away from this debate thinking that we actually changed the way Los Angeles is doing something. Today, all we did is have public discussion, and I think this is appropriate that we have this public discussion, because we're not talking enough today, and I hope in the next 18 days we do talk about the cost to the people of Los Angeles. And I'm willing to say, and someday I may run for office again, I'm willing to say today that I may vote for something in the next 18 days or the next 6 months or in the next year or what have you that actually reminds Angelenos that we're going to be paying more for what we do with our trash tomorrow than we've been paying for today. The only difference is I'm going to hopefully be able to justify that cost by saying before we just did it the way we've always done it for decades. And into the future, we're going to be doing it with purpose. We're going to be doing it with respecting our city constituents on all ends, like Mr. Reyes has pointed out in his verbal amendment to what we have before us, is that let's not say let's shift it from Northridge and then send it to East LA and shift it from Northridge and send it to Sun Valley or what have you. We need to respect all of Los Angeles, but fortunately and unfortunately, whatever we decide to do to relieve Granada Hills and Northridge of their burdens, at least from city trash, not from trash as a whole, all Angelenos are putting into that pot, and all Angelenos are going to pay that extra penny, that extra dollar, that extra $10 a month, whatever it all comes out to. But hopefully between now and those difficult decisions that are difficult for politicians, actually making a decision to say it's going to cost you, the voters, more money to do what we have to do in this city. We're going to make those decisions, hopefully, with a justification as to why we're doing that and why it has to be that way. Because when you do something right, sometimes it actually costs more money to do that. And we have to be willing to look ourselves in the mirror and say, there is the future. There is the responsible future, not the irresponsible way we've done it in the past.
Thank you, Mr. Cardenas. Ms. Perry, followed by Mr. Smith, Mr. Padilla, Mr. Parks.
Thank you, Mr. President. I wanted to, I guess, make an amendment as Mr. Smith and I move forward to our joint committee meeting to ask sanitation and the department to please proactively contact the AQMD now or today and ask them to please come forward with a strategy as we wrestle with the issue of diversion of tonnage to either municipality, an air quality mitigation strategy on transportation routes, as well as clean fuel issues, but to come forward with that and then to work closely with the department to categorize the areas that we need to include to make sure that it's something that is a substantive document by the time we hit the committee process, since time will be of the essence.
Yes, we've already been in that discussion, Ms. Perry, from other discussions, so we will validate that information and make sure we have that available for committee.
Okay, do I need to make that in the form of a motion or an amendment, Mr. President? Amendment?
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay.
Sorry, second. Yeah, we have a second from Mr. Smith, who is our next speaker. Mr. Smith.
Well, thank you. Just to kind of answer some of the questions that have been brought forward. First of all, what we had before us was 2 new companies to deal with. I think that's an important statement. With 5 options on the table, 2 from the Sanitation Bureau, 3 from the CLA. So as we go through the process, Ms. Perry and I, we have a lot of things that we can do out there to answer Mr. Weezar's concerns about what the options are out there. As far as Corona, Mr. Reyes, I commend Corona for that letter. I wish we would send the same letter to everybody that wants to dump in Sunshine Canyon, saying we don't want it either. But the similarities are that it is a permitted landfill, and people have the right to use that, unfortunately. I wish we'd send the same letter out. So I commend Corona for what they have done, but the permits are there, the options are there, and that is one of our options on the table. Mr. Rosendahl brought up some interesting questions to the San Bureau, and that is, how are we going to do all this? How does this all work? What are we going to do to make the 1,000 tons next year a requirement? And I think what you saw from the answers is our Rita Robinson, our general manager there, has really thought these issues out. The department is ready to answer those issues. We've been discussing some of them in Renew LA, and now it's time to just put the accelerator down to the pedal and go. We need to quit talking about these things now, start formulating some policies based on those great questions that Mr. Rosendahl asked. I wanted to also say, Mr. Reyes, on the issue of zoning, there was a motion that's in your committee from Renew LA that talks about industrial zones and the rights of use for industrial zones. And I look forward to that discussion. I hope you'll move that forward in context of the amendment you brought forward, because I think they marry together very perfectly. And I'd like to see that discussion as we move through the coming months on getting those last 8 motions that are in committees on Renew LA, so we'll formulate finally that policy, which is the overarching policy. Lastly, I want to just ask a question to Mr. Westhoff, and that is, as I read this letter, it talks about the contract as amended September 12, 2000. It does not mention the negotiated agreement that Mr. Padilla led last summer as the contract that really is before us, if I'm not mistaken.
That was, that amendment was agreed to but never implemented.
It was never codified.
Correct, which is why the motion last Friday that was passed by the council included the 2 issues that were agreed upon, and as far as I know, BFI has no problem with those 2 issues.
I just want to make that clear, because that is not in this letter.
Correct.
And so on the record, according to the city attorney, that the negotiated agreement from last summer is the contract we are looking towards signing as amended, this amendment.
Well, there was no amendment to the contract last summer. The existing contract is amendment number 1. This, if we're able to successfully negotiate with BFI in addition to the 2 points they've already agreed to, the additional waste shed, that would be formalized in an amendment which would be brought back to the council.
As part of the final package.
Correct.
But we are not deviating from that intention of this council last summer. That is still, that is still our policy, that we're going to go forward with that contract as negotiated.
Correct.
That would be the negotiated contract from last summer. And then also we are restating our policy statement that we made last summer as far as the reduction plan, which if we can do it in context of all these other ideas, meets that contract requirement as far as the clarification of diversion goes.
Any ton that you divert by virtue of recycling or energy conversion does not impact our compliance with the contract and will not trigger a potential increase in the price at Sunshine Canyon.
And the only thing that does is the 600 tons this year, and that's what's still to be negotiated.
Correct.
Okay, so I want to make that clear so everyone understands that the letter was somewhat nebulous on that point, and now we have it on the record, in your opinion, that we're going to go back and talk about that 600 tons, that the other diversion we're talking about, whether it goes to another landfill, that becomes a problem, but if we do it internally through reuse, recycling, and conversion, that does not count as a violation of the contract.
Correct, and hasn't penalized us over the past 5 years of the contract because we have been diverting more trash from there by virtue of recycling, so that has not negatively impacted the price.
I think those are very important concepts that this letter didn't quite clarify, so now we are clear on that point. Finally, as I close, I just wanted to say that I think we need to make sure that our statement is very clear today, that while we are accepting this contract with an extension of time to renegotiate some issues, that we are not saying that this is a done deal. This is not a done deal. And to make sure that that is a statement, I move, Mr. President, that we set a date on the calendar for March 10th, which you're now saying we're going to have a council meeting, that we have a placeholder there to take this discussion up one more time to determine where we are in those negotiations and determine if we need then to pull out of the contract altogether or whether we have an agreement that meets the criteria the council has accepted last Friday and last August.
Okay. A motion is not necessary. We will make sure that that is on the agenda for the 10th. Okay. Mr. Padilla.
Thank you, Mr. President. I was actually going to second Mr. Smith's motion because that's the ultimate safeguard. So if there's a commitment by the President to make sure that an agenda item appears on the 10th, then that should suffice. But I know somebody began to ask the questions earlier, and I wanted to follow up a little bit more. Parallel to the consideration of the item that's before us, we've had the discussions about Corona, about Avenal. What is the latest, not just in terms of the status, but the further number crunching that Mr. Smith has asked for, that I know I've asked for, on the incremental costs that it would require of the city to pursue those alternatives? Hold my time, please.
Well,
I'm sorry, on diverting trash, either Avenal or El Sobrante?
Yes.
Well, I think the status essentially is what was presented to you prior. There was a range of options, and the bottom line is that it's based, well, it's really based on two things. One, what the cost would be for the balance of the trash that is going to Sunshine, and two, to actually enter into discussions with these other two options and firm up precisely what the rates would be at the landfill and what the transfer costs would be.
No, and to be more specific, the question is, when the report was working its way through Renew LA, through budget, through energy and environment, through various committees, the observation was made that, wait a minute, are these numbers accurate enough because of assumptions that went into the calculus, including, what does it mean for the contract with BFI if we're sending less trash, but also miscalculations on how much trash we're talking about, because there is this policy in place now where we're going to be reducing the amount of solid waste generated on an annual basis in the city. That was some simple, specific things like the waiting time, the turnaround time at the gates at Sunshine Canyon, what that cost in terms of cost efficiency translated into. So there was a question as to the accuracy of the numbers. Because if we're being asked to consider BFI as the benchmark, Sunshine Canyon, and El Sobrante and Avenal being slightly more expensive, we questioned how much more expensive. Let us make the policy decision as to whether or not we're willing to pay more. But to be completely informed, we need to have confidence in how much more we're talking about. And we didn't have that confidence the last time we reviewed the item in committee. That's why I'm asking, have we sharpened our pencils? Have we reworked those numbers?
Well, we certainly will do that. In terms of operational issues and wait time at Sunshine, et cetera, I would expect those would be on the table. I know that there have been some questions about whether there is compliance with the current contract at Sunshine about how long trucks need to wait there. I think Ms. Robinson can give you more detail on extensive studies they've done on what the average wait time is there. And then some of the other issues such as, the actual transportation costs and as I think Ms. Robinson indicated, precisely how trucks would be routed and transfer stations which would be used and not used, et cetera, would all be part of the report back to you. But if Ms. Robinson has it.
Yes, I think we've worked really well with working with Sharon Masso and the CLA's office to sit down and look at those numbers. And I think we're down to a point where we pretty much, agree on numbers as they are. We've had so many numbers flying around, maybe Sharon could give us a better idea of what the final ranges were, because there were a number of ranges we looked at.
There were a number of ranges that we looked at, and depending upon the number of waste sheds that you would talk about diverting, the range is different. I think we were using the Western waste shed as an example of the potential cost difference from either remaining at Sunshine under current costs and then at gate rate. At the gate rate, I think that the estimated cost difference for the Western waste shed was in the range of $3.5 million. However, with the two potential options that we were looking at, of either using Avenal or El Sobrante, the cost difference it's driven by several things. It's driven by wait time, travel time, and the additional costs that we would be paying at Sunshine if there is an additional cost. But the range for the Western waste shed, I think, was anywhere for either one of those scenarios ranged between $1.2 million to up to about 1.8, depending upon wait time, depending upon travel time. However, if the costs at Sunshine increases, that range would also increase.
No, I understand, and I appreciate you spelling it out the way you did, because that's the information, those are the tools that this council and specifically the negotiating team needs to go into the talks with BFI with, because the decision is not being made in isolation. Replaying the tape back in my head to 6 months ago when we extended it for a 6-month time period, the consideration of this item to this time frame. And in the meantime, issuing an RFP, I thought we made it abundantly clear that we were not interested in reissuing an RFP for who can take all of our trash, one lump sum, one landfill or one final destination point with the capacity for the entire city. We were looking at, even if it meant piecemealing it for the city, we were interested in that to have viable alternatives to Sunshine Canyon. And when pieces of that formula, if you will, are not before us, then that puts this council and our negotiating team at a disadvantage going into between either now and next week or now and the 10th or now and the 17th to talk with Sunshine Canyon. So that's where the frustration is coming from. We had a first step in that first report. The numbers were pointed out to be not completely accurate. We asked for them to be reworked, but pieces are moving separately that should be moving together as far as the council is concerned.
Councilman, we did review the wait times and the travel times, and we spent an inordinate amount of time with the Bureau of Sanitation staff going through their numbers. Depending upon how you decide to divert has a great impact on the operation, and that's kind of why there are these differences in numbers, because one of the options, for example, that sanitation presented was taking all of the waste sheds through Clark's. And if it does happen, then obviously there are additional wait times. So the cost difference is really going to be driven by what this council ultimately decides on how much to divert and which to divert.
And I'll conclude with this. I know I'm over my time. Again, colleagues, I've been around here for a while. I heard 5 years ago, and I've heard just in the last 7 months that, if I count correctly, a majority of this council is willing to pay a little bit more if it means moving more quickly towards a landfill-free city. The question is just how much more, and so, we come back to the numbers.
Thank you, Mr. Padilla. Mr. Parks, and then Mr. Reyes.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just had a couple of technical questions, Mr. President. If we're planning for an update on March the 10th, is that a date that we could actually be voting on the issue, or is the vote going to be the 17th?
If we do schedule it on the 10th, we could take action. It's our hope to move the negotiations forward as quickly as possible. So again, it isn't the 17th, and we're backed up. But Mr. Smith, in your intention, I just want to make sure the 10th could be a vote? Okay.
I was just asking because I think, at least I'm leaving, I think at 10 o'clock for National League of Cities, so I won't be here then.
Okay, we'll coordinate to make sure that if there is, for instance, close consensus on the 10th, but not everybody's here, we would hold it over to the 17th.
Okay.
So
the other issue is, I don't know if, and I asked the city attorney technically, on that joint meeting, could Budget and Finance be involved in that without it being a Brown Act issue?
If it is a joint meeting and the total number of council members is 8 or over, it could be agendized as a joint meeting, but it would also have to be simultaneously agendized as a special council.
Just to reiterate that, members, whenever there is joint committee or joint committees meeting, we would, if we ever get past 8 council members, you also have to agendize it as a special meeting, the LA City Council. That doesn't obligate everybody to be there, but if we have 3 committees and there's more than 8 separate council members, you just agendize that as a special meeting of the Los Angeles City Council.
Yeah. I would recommend that we have Budget and Finance because the likelihood, if we get to that point, that there could be additional funding and those issues which Budget and Finance should be a part of, and so I'd
okay?
ask that that be a consideration.
Okay, we'll schedule it as such. Okay, Mr. Reyes.
Thank you, Council President. I did appreciate Councilmember Smith's summary of where we're at. Yes, it is in my committee. I am going to push it forward. But the harsh realities are with environmental impact reports, general plan zone changes, they will take time. And so the gray area here for everyone in this horseshoe is during that period by which we are able to determine where to divert, because we still have to answer the question how much, which to divert, then the third is where to divert. Where do you put that particular facility, whether it's an incinerator or it's not called an incinerator. What do we call that, Mr. Smith? Conversion technology.
It's not trash, it's waste.
Let's call it conversion technology.
It's not a dump, it's a landfill. It's
Right.
not an incinerator, it's
So
converted.
then exactly, Councilor Rosenthal just beat me to the punch. All the not in my backyard stakeholders will say, okay, where do I want that facility? In the meantime, we have the M3 zones where they're at, and we are vulnerable to that tension. So if every councilor takes the time to look at where your industrial zones are, that could be a conversion technology location and all the tension that comes with it. So again, I want to put that on the record because changing the general plan does not happen overnight. And we're going to have to wrestle with the fact that maybe in our districts, we end up with more than our share. Maybe do it equitably. All of that are going to be policy discussions that we will be having. So I just want to make that statement very clear. I'll be agendizing this on committee. We'll be moving forward. The general plan will take time. We have public hearing procedures that are CEQA-based, and I'm not sure it's going to line up to the pressure of answering the question, where will the trash go? And again, therein lies our challenge.
Thank you, Mr. Reyes. That's our last speaker right now on the agenda. We have a number of amendments that were offered. Madam Clerk, you want to do your best to try to summarize?
The Councilmember Perry made a motion to instruct the Bureau of Sanitation to contact the AQMD regarding air quality mitigation issues to address the traffic
Okay. We have
that
also,
would go through the other cities.
okay, we also have
And then
Verbal
also-
motions.
Yes, by Councilmember Weezer regarding cost concerns, and that would be to request the joint committees to submit recommendations to council with, before this issue is back on the 17th.
Correct? Okay, Mr. Smith?
We'll set that as a friendly amendment so we can vote
Okay,
on it.
great.
And likewise, Ms. Perry.
If there's no objection from the entire body, again, just to remind everybody, friendly amendments have to be accepted by all of us unanimously, so if there's no objection, that'll be accepted as friendly amendment. And any other amendments?
Well, a
motions, or anything?
clarification on what's before council. There would be a vote to extend the contract conditioned or containing in the letter, and also to continue item number 36 to March 17th? 10th?
Let's make that the 10th.
10th? Okay.
It would be, so to approve the extension conditional on the letter, which gives us control to reject the overall contract.
And
If-
then an instruction to the city clerk to place an item on the agenda regarding decision to rescind?
Yes, on the 10th.
Mr. President, if I could, I think that I think that the council could approve item 36 as with all the amendments contingent upon the letter. I think
35.
35, I'm sorry. And the council would need to instruct someone to enter in negotiations with BFI, and in addition to that, instruct the Bureau of Sanitation and the CLA to report back with an analysis of the disposal options and costs and operating implications.
Okay, it would be my intention, colleagues, to instruct the CLA to be the lead negotiator on that if there's no objection. And that can be obviously in consultation and maybe even in cooperation, but we'll talk about that with others that are here, Bureau, et cetera. Okay, all right. Mr. Padilla?
I just wanted to make sure, it sounds like all the proposed amendments are being melded into one, that they're accepted as a friendly.
Correct.
So I wanted to vote no on this because the way I see it, we're voting yes on extending this for 5 years, and there's room to talk over the next couple of weeks. So wanted to track either one vote or the series of votes as we can proceed.
Okay. I think right now we've been accepted as friendly right now, so I think it's one vote. Okay. Any other folks? If not, please prepare the roll and tabulate the vote.
13 ayes, 1 no.
Okay, that is approved. Let's go forthwith to the mayor on that. And we'll be in close consultation with all interested parties, and we appreciate, again, Allied being at the table, and we look forward to fruitful discussions in the next week. Thank you. Next item, please.
Next item is item number 37. That was called special by Councilmember Reyes, and there is a card on the item, and there are 2 amendments that have been distributed.
Okay. We've got a number of speaker cards on item 37. I'd like to invite Vincent Antonino back. Thanks again for your patience. I know you were almost out of here a little while ago. Dr. Paula Bagasau to follow him, Tomas Sinski, and Richard Haga. Those are the cards in opposition, and then we will turn to the cards that are in favor next. Please, 2 minutes apiece.
Thank you very much. I just want to read a statement. My name is Vince Antonino. I'm with the Eagle Rock Neighborhood Council, a board member, and I also live in Eagle Rock. My statement, pursuing public goals such as protecting environmental integrity, natural resources, historical sites, etc., requires a fair and balanced approach for all stakeholder interests, whether public or private. The proposed changes to the ordinance, in my opinion, will only benefit environmental interests while negatively impacting private property interests. Ultimately, all costs associated with this proposal will trickle down to individual property owners. The ordinance is not clear on what costs private property owners would be expected to bear. For example, how much would it cost for permits, tree experts, tree removal or replacement? How much will it cost private property owners if ordinance enforcement results in property devaluation? And most importantly, the ordinance has the potential to deny private property owners their rights to physically occupy their property, or worse, eliminate the economic use of the property. There is also the potential for property owners to incur litigation costs to recover damages resulting from applying the ordinance as proposed. I did not see any language in the ordinance that allows for fair compensation to private property owners for economic impacts. I would argue that the potential for a government agency to impose a 10-year moratorium on private property development, which the ordinance proposes, is unreasonable and, in essence, is the same as taking private property away from the property owner. This possibly violates the private property clause of the Fifth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. Since neither the city administrative officer nor the chief legislative analyst has completed a financial analysis of the proposed changes, passing an ordinance without knowing its full financial implications for private property owners would be inappropriate. The Eagle Rock Neighborhood Council voted to oppose this ordinance change, and I respectfully request that this council consider opposition also. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Paula Bagasal?
Thank you very much. I'm glad to be here. I actually have two speaker cards there, one that I'll be reading for my husband who could not be here today.
I'm sorry, under our rules, if the person isn't
Okay.
here, it's just 2 minutes. We can't
All right,
fill out
so
cards for
I'm-
others.
okay.
2 minutes. Sorry.
My name is Paula Bagasau. I am a property owner in 90065. I am a resident of 90031, and I'm a retirement home owner in Kern County, and we hope we don't get all the garbage. But in any event, I am opposed to this ordinance, which is a walnut tree, California bay, and sycamore tree. Do you all know what a California bay is, those of you who will be voting today? Actually, this is not oak tree ordinance. This is about adding 3 trees and making them equivalent to the oak tree, which has been protected for 30 years. Walnut trees shed 1,000 walnuts a year. They fall on your head, they roll down, and 3 months later you have a new tree. How can that be equivalent to an oak tree? We are part of a pro-LA organization trying to protect and inform vacant landowners in Northeast LA. We're trying to do some research on this ordinance, and here's what we found. I submitted a request for public records to each of the council members' offices on January 11th. Here's what I got. Only 5 of the 15 council members responded to my public records request at all. 3 of the 5 have nothing in their file and know nothing about this ordinance, this proposed ordinance. Now, how can that be? We also know that we have tried to secure some records from the LA City Forestry Committee, which is the place that originated in your advisory committee with this idea of these 3 native trees. We're still waiting until next week to get those comments. We also have secured about 3,000 public records on the ICO.
Go ahead. If you'd like to finish your sentence, go ahead.
Pardon?
If you'd like to finish the sentence, go ahead.
The 2 most provocative documents that we have is 2 documents representing private conversations between previous CD14 staff member, now in the mayor's office, and your chair of the LA City Forestry Advisory Committee about a set of 6 or 7 strategies that could be used to prevent development on vacant land in Northeast LA. 5,000 vacant landowners were
Thank
not
you.
part of that
Appreciate
discussion. We will be submitting all these documents to you as we have to the city attorney.
Thank you. Tomas Lisinski is our next speaker.
My name is Thomas Oshinsky. I'm a resident of Los Angeles. I'm an architect practicing in this city for over 20 years. And I've been lately a witness of avalanche of ordinances that are leaving this chamber or consider it to leave the chamber and become a law. I think your job is to create the clear and transparent law that I, as an architect, can follow and have no problem with adhering to. What we are getting is something opposite. After Mr. Reyes' fiasco with the Northeast moratorium on building in Hillside, we are getting the same moratorium right now citywide, spoon by spoon. And this is just part of it. There's another one coming, the tree ordinance. There's another one coming regarding the slope density calculations. There's another one coming regarding the ridge view protection. And I urge you to read that ordinance and see what it does to the law of the city. It takes the law from administrative process to discretionary process, and it's happened over and over and over and over. And what it is, it's an invitation for the neighbors bickering forever, for very costly and endless bickering. Please do your job, read the ordinance, please vote no. At this time, if there are problems, they should be studied, they should be publicly discussed. This thing was not, did not take place. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Richard Haga?
thank you. My name is Richard Haga. As a first-time builder of a home for my family, I'm opposed to this ordinance which targets property owners and makes an already difficult and expensive process even more difficult and more expensive. I feel that its real objective is to create a type of moratorium on all building. Thank you.
Thank you. Joan Lux is our next speaker.
Thank you. My name is Joan Lux. I'm speaking on behalf of the Hillside Federation, and I just want to say, for the most part, I am supportive of the ordinance, but one of the key issues that's important in this ordinance that lowers the size of trees to be measured, lowers the requirement of 1 acre to any size lot, all of those things, and increases the number of trees. All of those things are positive things. What is very important here that is not in this ordinance is the enforcement policy. And unlike what happened at the City Planning Commission on January 12th, the ordinance has not incorporated the changes that the commission requested. I emailed all of you yesterday. I'm sorry I did not get a chance to do it sooner, specifically to the request from the Planning Commission that said to have building permits withheld as part of the enforcement procedure is not being implemented the way we were told. Before the City Planning Commission hearing, I was told by Council District 13, Representative Molly Reisman, that they would ask, that the city attorney would ask Building and Safety to withhold permits after the owner was cited, but before the hearing process. Yet the language in the ordinance that is going to you today, under section 46.06, page 9, states that the Bureau of Street Services, after the notice and after the hearing, shall have the authority to request a building to withhold issuance of a building permit for a period of time. This completely deletes and weakens this ordinance by not having the building permit withheld during the hearing and the appeal time process. So I'm asking for you to send this back to Plum, which it did not go to. It came from City Planning Commission straight to you. This enforcement policy is key. Otherwise, we will have not changed anything in terms of the enforcement policy. I really appreciate if you would consider my comments, and I thank you for your time.
Our next speaker from the Foreside, Gordon Murley, to be followed by Becky Bendixson, and then Peter Lassen. Welcome, Mr. Murley.
President Garcetti, council members, Gordon Murley, President of Woodland Hills Homeowners Organization, the San Fernando Valley Federation, also chair of the Oversight Committee for the Santa Monica Conservancy. And there are a number of things I think this council has to understand that actually in the Girard Tract and Mulholland specific plan, with the exception of the added trees, you've already had the enforcement. And we have had a case where people cut down trees and lost the use of their land for 10 years. So it's not something new that hasn't been in the city of Los Angeles. What people don't really understand, black walnuts, according to the geologists, grow only where you have the fractured bedding plane, and that's one reason why they grow there, which means you have a landslide. So it's the black walnuts are really protecting all the hillsides from coming down when you get rains like you have today, and removing the older trees certainly will give you many more problems with the hills coming down. We really feel that you need to have an urgency clause in this, because we have a problem now within the Girard Tract and Mulholland getting the city to bother to enforce it when they do cut them down. And when we had the first one invoked about 1989, believe me, nobody wanted to touch an oak tree in the Girard Tract without getting permission to do it. And this ordinance does not say you can't do it. It just says you better look at it, have the city look at it, and see whether it makes sense or not to clear cut what 10 years ago was considered an unbuildable lot within the city of Los Angeles. So it's here for all of our protection. So please pass it, but what Joan Lux said is something we need to look at to make sure the enforcement is there, and have something that works. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Becky Bendixson? Okay, Peter Lassen? Hey, Peter Lassen here anymore? I saw him earlier. I know that. Claire Martyr Kenyon? Our next speaker will be Ralph Croy after that, and then Barbara Goldenberg.
Good morning, council members. My name is Claire Martyr Kenyon. I live in Los Angeles 90065. I'm the current chair of the Community Forest Advisory Committee for the city. And we're in full support of this ordinance, this initiative. The recommendations that you have before you are a result in large part from a task force that we convened in 2003 to review the oak tree ordinance. We thank everybody who has worked so hard to refine this ordinance, to address everybody's issues, and we are pleased to support the ordinance as it is right now. The reason that we need to support extra added native trees and give additional protection to the oaks is the same reason that we were looking at the oak trees 26 years ago when we passed the oak tree ordinance. Since that time, innumerable trees have been axed. We're losing our native habitat. We're losing our native heritage. Southern California black walnuts grow nowhere else in the world. We need to do this. This ordinance is timely. I would like to see the urgency clause myself, and we ask you to recognize the great value of our native habitat and preserve them for the future, and to approve the item before you now. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Ralph Croy?
Hello, my name is Ralph Croy. I'm a member of the Arbor Society. I love trees. They are a necessary item for a balanced ecosystem. Plants, trees moderate our climate. The most reasonable laws, rules do help us with a better life. The extension to the native trees, such as Southern California walnut and native sycamores, is a great step forward. We do, however, need to stop the government from giving widespread permits to remove massive amounts of trees, such as BFI's removal of 4,000 mature trees a few years ago. There needs to be a balance of protection with none of the mass exceptions as with BFI. This proposal seems to offer a benefit to our healthy way of life. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Barbara Goldenberg? Barbara Goldenberg here.
Good morning. I'm Barbara Goldenberg. I'm a member of the Community Forest Advisory Committee representing the 11th Council District. We've been working on this improvement to the oak tree ordinance for a long time. It's going to make our city a much better, healthier city, and I urge you all to support these improvements. Thank you.
Thank you very much. For the record, this closes public comment, but we did have Marco Garcia and Tony Butka also put cards forward for the record. I'm sorry, we're not going to be able to hear testimony on that. Just we had 6 and 6, and we're over our time overall for our public testimony. So with that, I'd like to call on Mr. Reyes as our first speaker. Thank you.
Thank you, Council President. First, I want to thank everyone involved in this process. It's been a very long process. We've had several public hearings on this item in Plum throughout the months. Commissioners had their sessions as well, so this has not been done behind closed doors. It's been done out in the open. There's been public discourse, contrary to some of the statements that have been made. What we are trying to do here is increase our ability to protect those natural habitats, those communities of trees that are out there, at the same time create a balance for the property owners. So I am pleased to be part of this ordinance that will protect the native trees. At the same time, I still believe we have some work to do on the enforcement side. There is a motion that's been generated by Councilmember Garcetti and Councilmember Zine that will talk about how we are able to improve upon the implementation. But I also want to make a verbal amendment that we have the departments who are involved with this process to report to the Plum Committee and also recognize and quantify the number of permits that are coming through. Part of our challenge here is that there are mom and pop property owners. They're not big-scale developers. There are folks who invested on a small parcel who are looking at their investment as retirement. What does this mean for them? How do we address those types of considerations? So I believe this is a collective effort to try to reach that balance. We need to get this off the ground, but at the same time, we've gone to a point where we have several amendments. We have been able to reduce the size of protected trees to 4 inches in diameter. We eliminate the minimum size, minimum lot size. We expand the universe of people who can perform tree reports, and we enhance enforcement provisions. The Planning Commission has done a lot of work in this regard too. They have added penalties for illegal tree removal will run with the land. Building permits can be withheld as part of the enforcement procedures. Enforcement language should be clarified, so that's something we need to work on. A maintenance fee for mitigation trees planted be included in the municipal code, and that staff should develop guidelines to help applicants understand requirements and procedures. So again, it's about educating the public, educating property owners, but also recognizing we have a balance to achieve. Many of the lot owners are not part of your big development, big developer outfit, so we need to reach that balance. So with that, I encourage and I vote, and still more work to do. And I want to congratulate my colleagues, Councilor Labange, and where is he? Our Council President, for their hard work in this effort. Thank you. I encourage and I vote.
Next speaker. Thank you, Mr. Reyes. Next speaker is Mr. Garcetti.
Thank you very much, Mr. Reyes, and thank you for your hard work on this as well. Let me start with my other thank yous. The Community Forest Advisory Committee, and for new members, each one of us has an appointment to make to that body. I still think there are a couple vacancies, so check in with me to make sure you have somebody on that, but that's an appointment that we all make. And citizens who volunteer their time, I really want to thank them, and Claire Marder-Kenyon for your leadership on that specifically. The Environmental Affairs Department, that was an important part of this. Department of Public Works, and specifically the Bureau of Street Services, Street Tree Division, and George Gonzalez, who heads that up. The Planning Department, Michael O'Brien, an Echo Park resident who I know worked very hard on this. Keith Pritzker from the City Attorney's Office. The Plum Committee under Mr. Reyes' leadership. And then the countless citizens who have contacted us and tried to make sure and work this to make it become the right sort of protection that protects the community as well as protects our trees. I spent the last 2 Earth Days with John Quigley, who you might recall is the guy who sat in that oak tree for a long time up in Santa Clarita. And we spent last year up in the Arctic. The year before, we were in Glassell Park under a beautiful tree that's right there in the park. And a lot of people, I think, saw him up in that tree and wondered, what's this radical guy doing out there, and what's the use of that tree? Why should we move a road around that? As we spend a lot of money on watershed stuff, which comes here, in our committees, we talk about Proposition O, which the voters overwhelmingly passed. As we talk about what happens to the quality of our water in the bay and in the ocean, in our lakes and in our rivers as well. That one tree, that giant oak tree, when it rains, like it did yesterday, absorbs literally tens of thousands of gallons of water and recharges our water supply. When you take a tree out, and I appreciate a lot what Gordon said in terms of the walnuts and their stabilizing effects, other trees, you lose that water. It gets washed out. It actually, not only do we lose the water, it becomes a pollutant because it goes through our streets. It washes up all the things we don't clean up after ourselves in the streets, and then we have billions of dollars of federal mandates to make our water clean, which is where we are today. When we first called for the oak tree ordinance to be strengthened 3 years ago, and joining with Councilmember Labange and building on his original motion there, I know Glenn Dake in my office worked very closely on this for a long time, and there was no way to know then how passionate our constituents would be about the protections and expanding to the western sycamore, the Southern California black walnut, and the California bay. But this is a real quality of life issue. This is where the City Council can make a difference. It can improve our air, it can improve our water, and it certainly improves the quality of life and our public safety. Constituents need neighborhoods that are not only safe, well-planned, and clean, but that are also green. And when you fly over Los Angeles, you see the pockets of green that we've done a good job of protecting, and then you see the concrete mass in other places that we haven't. Trees make our communities beautiful, peaceful. They clean up our air, reduce our pollution, and they encourage investment in our neighborhoods. For those who are property owners, it really encourages investment in our neighborhood when we have that sort of canopy. Cities that have become tree cities, Tree USA cities, are some of the highest property value cities in the country because they have not only on their street trees, but their private property trees enacted ordinances that protect that. Again, I want to thank the input. I've introduced two motions, amending motions today based on dozens of letters, calls, and emails that I received. And this ordinance wouldn't be in front of us were it not for the tireless act of the activists. I know there's a lot of fear out there, but just as the oak tree ordinance, when it first passed, there was a lot of fear, hasn't caused the sky to fall. Indeed, I hope it's been part of one of the things that's made sure that our pollution hasn't even gotten worse. This will be an important part too. So vote for a clean Los Angeles, a green Los Angeles, and vote for this today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Garcetti. Ms. Gruhl.
Thank you very much, Madam President, and thank you, Mr. Garcetti. You were going in the direction I was, is that the fact that many years ago people said this was going to destroy our ability to have our homes or other things, and it is sometimes a challenge for homeowners, no doubt, but this is a city that has prided itself in ensuring that we are a green city. As someone who was on the board of Tree People for many years, the importance of having trees in our city, the importance, I've told the story before, that after I had my son, where the pediatrician told me the best thing you can do is go outside with your child around trees, that the air that they breathe and everything, this is what we should be doing in our city. And I know that this revision to the oak tree ordinance that so many people have touched and had their imprint on will save more mature trees in the city of Los Angeles and preserve our natural environment. I've had two particular communities in my district who have been outspoken supporters of this new oak tree ordinance and now changed to be protected tree ordinance. But that is both from the Sunland Tujunga Neighborhood Council, who has submitted a letter of support, and many of the Studio City residents who have contacted my office. I think it is going to be a great step forward. It will cause some challenges. I think the enforcement is critical. I've had a lot of trees that have been removed in my district without the knowledge of the city of Los Angeles. And the best, I guess, helpers around the city are our constituents who let us know and let us know when this is potentially going to happen. And so I still encourage our residents to be those activists to let us know when that is occurring. So I just wanted to stand up in full support of the oak tree ordinance that is before us, called the Protected Tree Ordinance now, with both the Western Sycamore, California Bay, and the Southern California Black Walnut. To be a really great city is to be a green city and to be able to save our trees. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Ms. Gruhl. Mr. Zine.
Thank you. Wendy, a great city is a green city. I like that. Can I get staff to come forward? I have a couple of technical questions regarding this, the enforcement, the conditions for street service, the street trees division. I understand they can go to building safety and say, don't grant the permit to build. My question is, and I received a call one Saturday morning from a Valley resident, Mr. Gordon Murley, saying they were chopping down oak trees, and it was very difficult to get anyone to enforce on a Saturday. The question of enforcement, building safety, they don't have tree experts. Street tree division has the experts. And I understand there was a concern about the enforcement authority for the tree division to do the enforcement. Obviously, once the tree's down, we can withhold the permit. But the fact of the matter is there should be enforcement on the fact that someone chopped down one of the trees that are restricted. I need some clarification on that. Does this now grant the authority to street tree division, Public Works, to do that enforcement? Or do you still have to go back to Building Safety or some other entity to do enforcement, other than withholding the permit?
Good afternoon, George Gonzalez, Bureau of Street Services. Well, currently, Street Tree Division has the authority to, for enforcement of the oak tree ordinance. So it wouldn't change with this new ordinance.
So you can cite a homeowner or anyone who's chopping down one of the restricted trees?
The way the oak tree ordinance is written right now, yes. And the way it's proposed with the change, it would remain the same.
Okay, so building and safety, you would then contact building and safety to withhold the building permit in the event of violation?
Yes, if we felt that it was an egregious enough violation that it would require a building permit to be withheld, then we could do that. Yes.
And that'd be in addition to their violation of chopping down the tree or trees?
That's correct.
Okay. The other question is, when it comes to the 4 trees, those are all trees that are native to Los Angeles. We're not adding trees that are brought in from some other location. These are all native trees to Southern California, Los Angeles in particular.
That's correct.
The building and safety aspect, because in my district, we have a lot of oak trees, and we have people who want to build, and we get complaints about people chopping down these trees to go and process their building. We have people in the community, part of my community posse and part of the homeowner groups and part of the neighborhood council who are very vigilant in this. And Mary Ann King, who used to work, my office is now with planning, she was very committed to this when she was working in the 3rd district. Now she's in the planning department. But those all folks coming together with building safety, do you find, Dave, Laura, a big problem with this happening on a continuing basis?
Let me see if I understand your question, Councilman. The fact is that when we get a complaint, if there happens to be whether or not the site has a permit or not, okay?
That's
usually,
a building permit site?
Yes.
Or a site to chop down the tree?
Right. If there's a site where we currently have a building permit active, then of course, we're usually the first ones out there to make a determination. But in this case, what we will be doing is referring the matter immediately over to the Street Trees Division because they will be doing the enforcement. Now, at that time, we can work between our 2 departments and determine, for example, if there is construction ongoing at the time, we can make a determination as to whether or not we can physically stop that job at that time. But we would need to talk directly to the Street Tree Division so they can give us adequate information to make that determination and to verify that, in fact, there is a protected tree that's been damaged or cut down.
So when someone pulls their building permit, do we do an analysis to find out if there's restricted trees that can't be tampered with, or do we wait to receive a complaint? In other words, when someone wants to parcel land, say they have 10 oak trees, is there a process when they apply for that building permit that's noted, or is it someone complains or we just happen to fall into the knowledge that there are oak trees and they plan to destroy those oak trees or some of the other trees that we have, the other 3 that are restricted?
Currently, if you have oak trees on your property now, you are notified to contact us. So when they start their building process, they do contact us, and we advise them as to what needs to be done as far as getting oak tree reports, contacting an oak tree expert and what have you. But they're notified from the outset that if you have oak trees on your property, to contact us.
And do we have people that say, I didn't know it was an oak tree?
That's happened. It doesn't happen often, but yes, it's happened.
Okay, so now we're going to add these 3 additional trees. What kind of notification? Because I'm very supportive of this and very concerned that we do the right measure in public information and whatever we need to do to safeguard so we can maintain the trees that we want to restrict. And if they have to build something, build it around the tree or somehow make that condition apply. How do we make this notification of these other 3 trees that we're going to add to this oak tree, the old oak tree ordinance, or the oak tree ordinance where it's now being expanded?
Councilman, one of the things we are going to be discussing here with Street Trees is how we're going to be disseminating information. Once this ordinance passes and is approved, then the method of how we disseminate the information, how the ordinance works, how does it get to the right people that it applies to, and so on, how that works. So we're talking to each other as far as how that information is going to be disseminated. So since people will be coming into our department to get the permits in the first place, that's the best place to start with that information.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for the indulgence of the overtime.
Thank you. Wouldn't be the first time you've been indulged on overtime in this city. Mr. Rosendahl.
No, I appreciated what my colleague was asking because those were the basic questions. Now, let me ask you this. If I don't know anything about my trees, how am I going to be brought into the loop that these trees should be preserved?
Well, again, when you apply for a building permit, you will be notified from the outset that if you have a protected tree, you need to contact the Street Tree Division. Now, getting back to Councilman Zine's question about disseminating information or educating the public, that's going to have to be a multi-pronged approach. We're going to have to take a lot of different approaches to educate folks so they know from the outset what are protected trees.
These are 4 protected trees. Are there other trees that should be protected? Are there other native trees that we didn't look at for whatever reason?
We looked at a lot of trees during the process, and we whittled down these 4 because we felt that they were most significant for the habitat and for the ecology of Los Angeles.
Well, I want to thank Barbara Goldenberg from the 11th District, who's been steadfast with you all representing us. We love trees. They are the lungs of the planet, and the more we can keep, and if we can go forward with an urban forest, like our mayor has said, 1 million trees. I'm saying 60,000 in the 11th District. I've been planting trees every weekend, and I'm delighted that we're going to preserve these beautiful trees. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rosendahl, Mr. Cardenas, and then Mr. Huizar.
Yeah, I think it's good for us to move forward and be much more cognizant of how we need to protect everything in the city of Los Angeles, and trees are very important to our existence, just to be able to breathe. But one of my concerns that you touched on earlier was outreach. How are we going to make sure that we're not putting people inadvertently in a position where they're going to be breaking the law, where they're going to be fined, where they're going to have problems, where they may be in a situation where they can't do anything for 10 years because they violated inadvertently? What are we going to do to make sure that we don't have accidents? Obviously, if somebody purposefully violates the law or what have you, let's throw the book at them. But what I'm concerned about is that single-family resident owner that thinks their home is their castle, not a tree house, their home is their castle, and they think, these are my boundaries, I want to make it look better, I want to improve it, that tree's in my way, the roots are interfering with my drainage, all these kinds of things, and they say, time to get rid of it and maybe even plant several smaller trees. You may have a situation like that. What are we going to do to make sure we protect those individuals from having accidents? My time, please.
I'll answer it 2 ways. One is if property owners are going to develop in their site, there's always requirements for developing that site. This is just going to be another one of the requirements, and they will.
Does this apply to existing residences?
Yes.
Does this apply to, say, a resident in Arleta who might have about 10 trees on their property, and they're 30-year-old trees, and obviously the trunks are much bigger than 4 inches, and they say they want to cut a tree down on a Saturday and you know, kind of do a little something to their yard? Could they be affected by this ordinance? Would
Yes.
they be affected?
Yes.
See, that's what I'm talking about.
Well, I was coming to that part of it. The other thing that the current oak tree ordinance and this native tree protection ordinance that we're proposing here, one of the things it does not preclude you from removing trees. It just puts the tree removal process, it creates a process for removing trees. So just because you have trees doesn't mean that you cannot remove the trees. It just means that you have to engage in the process, and if by all means you show that you cannot develop your property and preserve the trees, then yes, the trees could be, you could get a permit to remove the trees.
Okay. And please answer my question on outreach. What are you going to do to educate Angelenos? Not developers, I'm talking about Angelenos, single-family residents, those folks.
Again, we mentioned that it's going to have to be a multi-pronged process. Certainly at the permit counter is going to be one of our strategies. Websites, we have information pieces that we've already worked on, neighborhood councils, your council offices, so every opportunity that we have to inform the public, we're going to have to take that opportunity.
What's the penalty for somebody accidentally getting rid of a tree without going through this process?
Keith Pritzker, Deputy City Attorney. The penalty would be, any violation would be a misdemeanor. So it could be a maximum of $1,000 or up to 6 months in jail if it was filed as a misdemeanor.
Per tree?
Yes.
So the thing is, we're actually Oh, by the way, for those of you who are cringing at my questions, I'm voting for this, so please relax. I'm just trying to do the right thing of making sure that we don't inadvertently put, especially low-income families, especially people who aren't part of neighborhood councils, especially people who may not even be able to read and write. I mean, with all due respect, you know, you don't have to be able to read and write to own a home. You don't have to be able to read and write or be involved in a neighborhood council to work your tail off and finally own your own property. That's not a requirement. But all I'm saying is, I still haven't heard an aggressive answer about what we're going to do. You did express that we should do outreach, and we will. But what are we going to do to make sure that we have a nice, good blanket of outreach? My time, please. Are we, let me be blunt, are we funding you more money to do it? All this costs money. Leaflets, pamphlets, sending people to meetings, all this costs money. Are we fortifying you with that? Or are we just going to kind of stretch our resources a little bit further and let everybody know that way? I'll just push my button again after they answer the question.
Okay. And just as a point of information, I didn't clarify on the amendments that are before us that I submitted today are specifically for DWP and Fire Department to do the publicizing that I know has been brought up. Okay. Sorry, please.
Currently, the outreach we're doing is with existing resources, to answer your question. But
Okay. Mr. Weezer.
Thank you. And like my other colleagues, I just want to reiterate the importance of the outreach, not only, I guess, internally with building and safety, but also to the public and your small homeowner who is, you know, doesn't own acreage, and I'm sure on acres you probably have a larger developer doing some of those who may be more familiar with the city's ordinances. But have other cities expanded the protected species beyond the oak tree?
yes.
Examples?
I just looked at some, and I'm drawing a blank right now. But there are several cities in California. I don't know of any in Southern California. Like I said, it'll come to me in a second, but there are other municipalities in California, and certainly nationwide, there's more and more municipalities that are doing exactly this, protecting their native heritage.
And it seems something new, right? I mean, it hasn't, because when I was a practicing attorney, I worked for a firm where we represented smaller cities as their city attorney, and oftentimes we'd have a question as a first-year, second-year associate. I'd go research about oak trees, and I'd get to the municipal code and find that there was only one species being protected, which was the oak tree, and nothing really had happened in decades, whether here in the city of Los Angeles or other cities. And I do think what we're doing here is we're really catching up to the cities expressing some value in protecting the history of the state and the vegetation of the state, and we're putting more value in this too. But I think it should have been probably, you know, we're kind of just catching up to doing that, because for the longest time we've only had one species protected, and going from 1 to 3 is really not a whole lot in my view in terms of what has been done in the past. So I want to just mention that I support this, and again to really reiterate the importance of doing the outreach, because I think what Mr. Cardenas was really driving at is that there's going to be some smaller homeowners or smaller parcel owners who are really going to go out in the backyard one day and look at that and be possibly prosecuted for not being aware of this change in the law. And even, I mean, not recent change, even if it lasts a few years, it's going to be pretty difficult for some of these folks to be aware of this. So
Excuse me one second, Mr. Weezer. I invited Ms. Kenyon. She, as appointed by this council and as the chair, just as a commission president would be, for some of these points of information that Mr. Cardenas raised and Mr. Weezer. Sorry, Mr. Weezer, continue.
And so my question is, who is the point person to, and I guess that's the amendment, I guess I didn't hear the amendment, Mr. President Garcetti, that you said that. Who will be the point department persons, it's not only going to be building and safety, but who's going to be responsible for the outreach so that 6 months from now, a year from now, if we are having difficulty about people not knowing about this, that we are holding somebody accountable and responsible for this?
I'll let them answer. But the amendments refer just to 2 departments, but the overall responsibility, I'll let them answer on.
Yeah, ultimately, the overall responsibility would be on Bureau of Street Services, but from what I understand with from the motion, it's going to also be, part of the outreach is going to be done by Department of Water and Power and Fire Department.
And
At least
so,
initial outreach. And building and safety.
who's ultimately in charge? Who can we come back you know, who can we say 6 months from now, hey, we don't think people, in my district, for example, people are telling me that they're getting prosecuted and they're not even sure of this, and who can we go back to in 6 and say, hey, what is going on out there? We need this fixed.
Me.
You. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Cardenas.
Thank you.
And Mr. Cardenas, just the reason, sorry to reiterate, that I asked the chair of the
Absolutely.
commission, she might be able to answer some of the cities
Thank
that
you
you
very
had asked
much.
before.
My main point is about outreach, making sure that when we enact this and it's good and it's important, and with all due respect, I think if we do good outreach, it's probably going to cause people to question, why is the city so darn interested in my tree? Well, maybe in that outreach we could actually spend a little bit of time explaining to them how important oxygen is and stuff like that. And it's not just the forest, you know, in South America that we should be worried about. It's the collective. Maybe that education is really something that we have an opportunity to do. Yes, outreach. Can you point out what you might know about outreach and how comfortable you feel that Angelinos are going to know what we're doing here?
Yes, thank you. About 2 years ago, when this was at Plum, the Planning and Land Use Management Committee had similar concerns. I remember Councilmember Weiss specifically and yourself had this concern. And we convened a small group of people who sat down and figured out what kind of information needed to be disseminated to people who might be affected by this ordinance. And the Bureau of Street Trees, now the Urban Forestry Division, came up with a plan, and I think that outreach plan, if you examine it, will answer a lot of your questions. Simple things such as going through the neighborhood councils, perhaps the DWP with an insert into the invoices that go out every month, those kinds of things. I think that there will be a good outreach program, and I think that we obviously have to address that issue, and I think that a large part of that has already been done. Can I just point out for Councilmember Huizar that the city of Pasadena does currently protect 13 species of trees. Beverly Hills protects 16, and even our neighbor Glendale has protected 3 species of trees for the last 20 years or more.
And Councilman Cardenas, for us, outreach is really going to be the key to this, because if people, once this ordinance is passed, if it's passed, and people then look at their trees as an impediment to development as opposed to an asset on their property, then we've missed the mark. Our goal is to protect the trees, but our goal is also to educate people that these are a valuable asset to the whole city in total and to them privately. So that's our ultimate goal.
Yeah, well, the thing is, I appreciate your willingness to say that, you know, the buck stops with you on this one, and that's really wonderful. I don't hear that very often. We usually have to ask many more times before somebody actually says, it's me. So thank you for that. Also, I wanted to remind everybody that this should it pass today, the mayor signed it, et cetera, this wouldn't take effect for another 6 weeks or so. So it's not like come next Monday, you know, somebody accidentally cuts a tree and before you know it, they're in court. It's not going to happen like that. So there is some time to prepare for this outreach, to get the details of this outreach. And that's what I'd like to have, Mr. President, is an amendment requiring that the departments who are going to be involved in this outreach, that they report to the council, to the appropriate committee, and give us a report back in 30 days as to what this comprehensive outreach is going to be like. In addition to that, please do not avoid the word budget. Please. I know it's a word that we kind of don't want you to use when you're telling us this is what you need to do. And as you said earlier, this is all going to be absorbable. Maybe, you know, if we're lucky, it will be, and we'll do the right kind of outreach and by absorbing it within the departments, and DWP do their part, put a leaflet in there with their bills and all that stuff. But the bottom line is, I want to make sure that you do not avoid that, please. That you please let us know if there's something innovative that would create a higher level of success, and it does cost the city money. Please tell us. okay? I think that's very important. Don't be afraid of offending us or scaring us. Just tell us the truth, whether it be money, whether it be resources, whether it take a little longer than you thought, you know. And also, I'd like to make sure that in this outreach, you explain to us what the ongoing outreach is going to be. Somebody moves into Los Angeles 6 months from now, they're a new homeowner. You know, maybe once a year DWP will put one of those inserts. I'm not sure. One of the things that I'm really concerned about is my father was a gardener, and I think there's another council member around the Horseshoe, his father was a gardener. I could see my father worked for a lot of wonderful clients. They treated him very well, and they really liked him a lot. And he had clients for decades in some cases. But the thing is, I could see that one jerk asking my father to cut down a tree, and he goes ahead and does his job, and all of a sudden that client gets noticed by the city that, oops, you did something wrong, and we're going to potentially fine you or what have you. I could see that one person trying to beat down my father and say, it's your fault, you're the professional here, you should have known this, you should pay whatever they charge me. That kind of burden shouldn't fall on anybody. But unfortunately, that's what happens when people don't know what's going on, be it the gardener, be it the homeowner, or what have you. So hopefully this outreach will in fact be savvy enough to realize, you know, we need to let the gardeners associations know, we need to let the people on both ends, not just the homeowners, but people who interact with our trees and maybe the ones that are hired to actually cut it down. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cardenas. And in one of the amending motions, number 2 directs the Bureau of Street Services and CAO to report on a quarterly basis on resources necessary to enforce this ordinance. So that will hopefully cover a number of the concerns you brought up. Mr. Reyes.
Yes, on January 10th, I submitted a letter to the Planning Commission where I state I want to review the data 6 months after the ordinance has passed in Plum to look at how we can best approach this policy given all of its potential impacts on the whole range of folks who own property and who are looking at this challenge. My verbal amendment today is to make sure that we have a report on the number of permits being applied for when we're dealing with these trees and this whole program so that, again, we understand and assess the impact. Improving outreach, how do we look at this spectrum, if you will, of different income groups and hardships and trying to define the policy that will create that balance while keeping with the spirit of the intent, which is preserve our native trees. So with that, I'd like to ask for an aye vote, and maybe is anyone else in the speaker queue can close discussion and move for a vote.
Thank you very much, Mr. Reyes. I also wanted to read the name of Scott Wilson into the record that we'd close public comment. Is there anybody who objects to either of the amendments? If not, those will be accepted as friendly. And if we can please prepare the roll on the ordinance and the 2 amendments and tabulate the vote.
13 ayes.
That is approved. Forthwith to the mayor, please. Thank you all very much. I think that's all on our regular council agenda, but we do have a special meeting, one item. If we can please call the roll on that.
Cardenas, Gruel, Han, Weezer, Labange, Padilla, Parks, Perry, Reyes, Rosendahl, Smith, Weiss, Weston, Zine, Garcetti, 13 members present, and a quorum, Mr. President.
Okay, we have one item before us. Anybody wishing to call it special?
There are 2 committee reports on that item, and I believe the recommendation would be to adopt the HCED report.
Do we have a motion for either one? Are they in conflict with each other
We
at
should
all?
adopt the Housing Committee report.
Okay, well, let's move the HCED report. Mr. Wesson does that. I'll second that. If we can.
Mr. President, it's not on the electronic, so a voice vote will be required.
Colleagues, we're going to do a voice vote, so everybody please let us know where you're at. Please call the roll on the vote, Madam Clerk.
Cardenas?
Oh, you got it? Okay, it's back now on. Oh, thank you, Mr. Cardenas. You got the voice vote in before. Please prepare the roll and tabulate the vote.
13 ayes.
That's approved 16-0 with Mr. Cardenas' 2 votes. No, just kidding. All right, that goes forward, and that is, let's do forthwith on that, please. And that ends the special meeting. We return to the regular meeting. We have items for posting and referral. Let's post and refer those.
And there are excuses on the desk. Councilmember Weiss requests to be excused Friday, March 3rd to leave at 11:45 for personal business. A motion is required.
Okay, Mr. Smith moves, Mr. Zine second, no objection, unanimous vote. He is excused.
Councilmember Padilla requests to be excused April 18th and 19th for personal business. That meets council policy.
Mr. Padilla is excused.
Councilmember Labange requests to be excused from today's meeting for personal business, and that also meets council policy.
Mr. Labange is excused.
And that clears the desk.
Okay, yeah, any announcements, colleagues? Ms. Hahn.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, a couple weeks ago when we were approving the appointment of Ed Box, our new general manager of the Animal Services, you may recall that I made a few comments and I had a certain line of questioning as a result of some concerns that a constituent of mine had about our new general manager and some of the groups in the animal rescue community. And my comments identified a number of animal groups, including the Defense of Animals, Directors of Animal Welfare, and mentioned Mary Cummings in my remarks. And I also remarked at how the FBI had certified that another group was considered a terrorist group. And unfortunately, I think my comments could have been interpreted as me identifying all these groups as terrorist groups, and I certainly wanted to make sure that was not my intention to label all of the rescue community groups as terrorist groups, and I don't consider Mary Cummings a part of that, and I don't consider IDA or DAW a part of that. And I think the message is, you know, we all have the same goal in mind for the City of Los Angeles, and that's to try to reduce the number of unfortunate killings that we have of all of our animals. And someday, wouldn't it be great if Los Angeles really was a no-kill city, and that we got to the point where we had less and less unwanted animals, and more people were adopting, and less animals had to be killed. So hopefully, we can all work together and know that I'm supporting our new general manager, that one day Los Angeles could add that to our list of great accomplishments to be a no-kill city. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Hahn, and thank you for that clarification. Any other announcements? Mr. Parks?
Thank you, Mr. President. Just want to alert the community that the student or off-campus housing overlay zone meeting will be held at 3 meetings, really, at the Epic Center. There'll be 2 public workshops on Saturday, March the 4th and Saturday, March 11th from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. where the community can come in to the Epic Center 3990 South Menlo and make comments about the ordinance. And then the public hearing, and this ordinance will impact both CD 1 and 8. That public meeting will be held Tuesday, March the 14th at 6 p.m. at the California Science Center in the Locher Conference Room, 700 State Drive in Los Angeles in the Coliseum area. Also like to announce that the 8th District is putting on a disaster preparedness training on Monday, March 13th. That will be at 7 to 9 at the Constituent Center at 8475 South Vermont. And also the Greater Los Angeles African American Chamber will be hosting a low-cost health care solutions for small business, and it will be held at the Fame Renaissance Center at 1968 West Adams on Friday, February 24th at 12 noon. And that should do it.
Any other announcements, colleagues? Announcements? If not, can I ask everybody in chambers to please rise for our adjourning motions? Ms. Gruhl.
Thank you, Mr. President. It's with great sadness, and I know all of you knew John Hall, who had been an active member of the Plumbers Union, who passed away February 25th. He was 52 years old of a sudden heart attack. He was born and raised in Los Angeles. He began his career as an apprentice plumber in 1980 with the United Association of Plumbers Local Union 78, where he mastered the skills of journeyman plumber, and at night he devoted his time as a plumbing instructor at the training center. His dedication to the plumbing trade and to his local union was most appreciated by the members of Local 78. He was elected as business agent in 1989 and then became Local 78's business manager in 1995, an office he held until his passing. John was also active in the city of Los Angeles and state of California. In 2002, Governor Gray Davis appointed him to the John to the Contractor State Licensing Board. He also served as the vice president of the California State Pipe Trades and was an active Mason. He was very proud of his involvement in the charity organization Big Brothers of Greater Los Angeles and spent many years as a big brother to Sean Wall. He was someone I had met before, but recently came to know because he was dating a friend of ours, and really just had begun kind of a new life with Melissa. And so it was quite tragic that he passed so suddenly, they say, without pain. So we're hopeful and pray for their family. He is survived by his mother, Joanne Hall, his brother, Robert Hall, and his daughter, Katrina, who's 9, and his true love, Melissa. I have one more, but I'll wait a minute.
Thank you. Mr. Padilla had asked to speak on that. My apologies, Mr. Padilla, if you want to say something. I know Ms. Hahn, maybe a couple others.
I'd love to be a co-presenter on that. A lot of us knew John. I've known him for about 10 years or so, and just recently had breakfast with him a couple of weeks ago. And as Ms. Gruhl said, she read sort of his professional sort of public life. A lot of people may not know that he passed away of a heart attack. It was a pretty massive heart attack, so it was quick. He had a heart attack just less than 2 years ago and was a wonderful spokesperson for turning your life around. A lot of us work hard each and every day and lose sight of maintaining proper balance in our life, both physically and emotionally. So if you knew John years ago and had seen him recently, you know that he was taking very good care of himself lately. He was eating well, had lost weight, was very physically active, loved his little girl, and you're right, had started a sort of a new life with Melissa. And to see somebody sort of turn their life around and be so positive and still very productive, and then just all of a sudden, without a moment's notice, lose that person. It hurts and it's pretty impactful. I caught wind of it just Sunday morning, literally hours after he passed away, and knowing that we had met recently and had another meeting coming up soon just brings it home all too much. And there's not a person around this horseshoe who I think hadn't met him, hadn't been touched by him. Of all the labor leaders, he's probably one of the best read. One of the things that we did was exchange which books we were reading and which ones we should read next. So he was a wonderful student and leader and parent and friend.
Thank you, Mr. Padilla. Mr. Cardenas?
Thank you for this opportunity to say a few words about a very beautiful person. John Hall was a big guy. He was a husky guy, but he had a big heart, and as was pointed out earlier, very intelligent and just a gentle giant. I remember sitting behind him as I ran into him at the Burbank Airport, and we were flying to Sacramento in the morning, and he had an appointment he needed to go to and come back. And it was an awkward situation when an overzealous flight attendant started to harass John and about his bag. And he's a big guy, so when he's standing on the plane, he's kind of imposing. And I just happened to be sitting a couple rows behind him, and he was trying to sit down and get his bag situated, and she really just went after him, and she was really badgering him, and she actually threatened to throw him off the plane. And John only said but like 3 words, like, "What do you want me to do with the bag?" And he was being very kind about it. That's just the way he was. And just to show what kind of person John was, he didn't get hot, he didn't get bothered, he did shake his head a little bit, and he looked at me and he said, "I have one appointment to go to and come right back. I can't take another plane." And right before he said that, some strangers had come to his defense. People who didn't know John, Other passengers told the lady to just calm down, and he didn't do anything. And it was a very awkward situation. I just wanted to point that out because it was just kind of one of those things that just happened. But like I said, what was most touching to me now that I reflect on John was the fact that these strangers came to his aid, because as big as he was and as imposing as he could be if he wanted to be, he was very gentle and very respectful to her, even though she was just really getting out of hand. And people just came to his aid and said, you know what, leave the guy alone. He didn't do anything. And me knowing him, I kind of joked with him a couple times after that when I saw him. But we're going to miss him because he was a wonderful human being. And like Alex, I met him 10 years ago. And one of the beautiful things about John is that he was very kind and very gentle and easy to talk to. But when it came down to business, he's the kind of guy that in 2-3 minutes you were done with business and you were glad to spend the next 20 minutes just catching up. Thank you.
Other members on Mr. Hall? All members will make another adjourning motion, Ms.
I
Grove.
just forgot at the end of that, sorry, to let you know that contributions could be made in his memory to the Shriners Hospital for Children, the Big Brothers of Greater Los Angeles, and the memorial services will be held tomorrow, March 1st at 10 a.m. at the Shrine Auditorium at 655 West Jefferson. And so he was really great. As everyone said, had a really big heart, and a gentle guy. My next adjourning motion is in memory of Kay Herzog Messner. She was 91 years old. She graduated from UCLA in 1936 and was founder of Gold Shield of UCLA, an organization I have been active with. She received the UCLA Community Service Award from the Alumni Association and was a retired secondary school teacher. She was very involved in her community and served as a member of the county grand jury in 1961, 6 years on the Board of Family Service, and 16 years as chairperson of the American Cancer Society in San Marino. She is survived by her daughter, Marty Messner Cloran, and was quite an activist and force to be reckoned with at her 91 years young. Thank you.
Thank you. Other adjourning motions? I'm sorry, Ms. Hahn and then Ms. Berry.
Thank you. I'd like us to adjourn today in the memory of Louis Hyatt, who passed away on February 17th. He was 68 years old and had lived in LA County for 40 years and was the vice president of the First Interstate Bank here in downtown for 30 years. He was the father of one of my senior lead officers, Terry Casey, who works in Wilmington. He's survived by Terry, a son, Christopher, and another daughter, Elizabeth, as well as 2 grandchildren.
Thank you. Ms. Berry?
Thank you, Mr. President. As we culminate Black History Month and move toward Women's History Month, I just wanted to take a moment to remember the life of Octavia E. Butler, who passed away at the age of 58. She was known and made a name for herself as an African-American woman in a genre dominated by men as a writer in science fiction. Over the years, she produced a number of works, but her seminal work was Kindred. She earned distinction of being the first lady of a small, tight-knit circle of African-American writers of science fiction, horror, and fantasy. In 1979, Doubleday published Kindred, which became one of her best-selling titles. It was the story of a 20th century African-American woman who travels in time back to the antebellum South to save her great-great-grandfather, a white plantation owner. Through the story, Butler explored themes of race, power, gender, and the environment. By 1995, she had written 10 novels, including Parable of the Sower, and won the nation's two top prizes for science fiction writers. And that year she received a MacArthur Foundation grant. In the 1970s, she was very dominant in the field, in a small group of recognized African-American writers, and her only other contemporary was Samuel R. Delany. But in spite of all that, she succeeded and made a tremendous name for herself, and some would argue that she opened the doors for the next generation of women science fiction writers.
Thank you. Mr. Wesson.
Yes, Mr. President, I'd like to adjourn in the memory of Gilbert Wilson, who was 88 years old. He had a wonderful life, but a tragic death. On December 31st, he suffered from Alzheimer's, and he was placed into the Eden Retirement Home, which is on 8th and Crenshaw Boulevard. 2 days later, he disappears. You would think that they would be able to keep up with an 88-year-old individual suffering from Alzheimer's. His family reported his missing on January 2nd of this year, and no word. They called all the hospitals, they called the morgue. Finally, they came to my office, and on the 23rd of February, we were going to have a press conference showing his photographs, everybody positive that he was somewhere, and just we needed to have him identified. Now, what we discovered 5 minutes before the press conference, when I had his wife, his daughters, and his grandsons in my office, is that he was dead, and that he was at the coroner's office, and that on January 3rd, he was struck in the valley by an 18-wheeler and killed immediately. The next tragic thing that occurred to him, because he was fair-skinned, he was designated as a Latino. So when the family called the coroner's office, there was no record of anyone that age being there. Now, they found him because when you're an Alzheimer's victim, you you staple, sew the name into the guy's clothing. His name was sewn into his clothing. So after the family waited for almost 2 months, 5 minutes before we were going to make an announcement to ask for help, we discovered that he was killed. Again, Gilbert Wilson, who was a resident of Los Angeles for over 30 years, a chef at Hollywood Park, and he's survived by his wife, 2 daughters, and 4 grandsons.
Thank you. Mr. Zine?
Highway Patrol Officer Gregory John Bailey passed away February 25th at approximately 11:30 hours. Motorcycle officer from the Highway Patrol, Gregory John Bailey, was en route home when he observed a possible intoxicated motorist pull that motorist over on Highway 15 near Hesperia. While he was conducting that investigation, another motorist, intoxicated driver, collided with Officer Bailey's motorcycle. The car careened into Officer Bailey, and he died. Officer Bailey was a 10-year veteran of the California Highway Patrol. He is survived by his wife and 4 children. Officer Bailey is the 6th Highway Patrol officer to die in line of duty in the last 5 months. May Officer Gregory John Bailey rest in peace.
All members on that. Thank you, Mr. Zine. Madam Clerk, please call the roll. Thank you, colleagues. The next meeting of the City Council will be tomorrow, Wednesday, March 1st. This meeting is adjourned.